Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders. Welcome to episode 98 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. We got a lot to be covering today. We're going to get back to our usual format of part one being this week in Bitcoin, part two being this week in macro, and part three being this week in geopolitics. But the main overarching theme is what everybody is still talking about. Who killed Charlie Kirk? Who had the motive to assassinate? But we're obviously going to tie it in with the wider geopolitical content, and we're going to follow the money, and we're going to reach a very different conclusion to what most people that are following the lies of the FBI, following the lies of the media, and following the misinformation in social media, because we're going to tie it into what is the monetary flows and see if we come up with a different conclusion. Now, obviously, we are theorizing and analyzing, and we will never know the truth. We still don't know the truth about some of the biggest conspiracies, including the assassination of JFK decades later. I predict a similar thing. So let's draw some conclusions, make our moves, and figure out what it means and how to protect ourselves in this proof of weapons network that is vastly and very fastly imploding and cannibalizing the West itself after doing it in other regions of the world. So if we have not met already, my name is Simon Dixon. I spent the last 25 years of my life obsessing over the topic of investing and money, and 14 years ago encountered Bitcoin as a resistance against what I now call the proof of weapons network. And that was with peaceful proof of work. And each and every week I go live to make sure that you're on top of the three topics that are now converging on each other as we transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies, which are going to change everything. And you need to know how to protect yourself. So let's go through what are we going to be covering in each segment. So this week in Bitcoin in part one, I'm going to be sharing everything that happened this week, but also digging deeper into some of the technical aspects around what is this TikTok thing all about? Why is it so important? And what do you need to know to understand how the proof of weapons network integrates, and why they want your Bitcoin and what they are doing to accumulate your Bitcoin. Part two, this week in macro, I'm going to be going through fiscal dominance, the carnage that's happening in Japan, France, UK, how it all impacts the macro and fiscal policy in America, alongside the artificial intelligence, and bring it right round in a circle around why the proof of weapons network is crashing Europe with energy right now, and the energy crisis and the rampant energy inflation that's happening. And then finally, in part three, we're going to be doing this week in geopolitics, and we're going to be answering the question, why would Israel want to assassinate Charlie Kirk? And what are the two other operations so that we can get ahead of them? And is that just a one big conspiracy theory? And even if it is, and even if we don't know the truth, what can we draw from it in order to protect ourselves and understand the next steps? So with that in mind, let's jump straight into part one this week in Bitcoin. How will they weaponize Bitcoin and TikTok? So we've been talking about these different proof of weapons network, fiat currency, debt-based Ponzi scheme, weapons that have been created in order to get between you and your Bitcoin. Make sure that you are stuck in the fiat currency debt-based Ponzi scheme, locked up in the capital markets, so that BlackRock and the financial institutions have more power and control over you, rather than you having more power and more autonomy and more sovereignty. And so I've always talked about the different weapons. They are Bitcoin treasury stocks to make sure you don't own Bitcoin and you own a stock with some humans in the middle instead. Bitcoin ETFs, rather than owning Bitcoin direct, having a stock that represents Bitcoin. And of course, stablecoins or central bank digital currencies. At the moment, we're beta testing the stablecoin standard in the US. And in October, we're launching the CBDC beta standard in the European Union. This is all tools and weapons of the fiat currency proof of weapons network to come between you and your exited Bitcoin proof of work. So I want to ask you a question for those long-term listeners of Bitcoin Hard Talk. If you're new to the show, I'm sorry if you got fooled. But the long-term listeners would have known not to buy any of these Bitcoin treasury companies on the stock market. So my question to you, did you get fooled by the Nakamoto public treasury company and all the hype that came with it when David Bailey said he would smash buy $1 billion of Bitcoin in one day at the top of the market? What has happened since then? Well, the stock is now down 96% from the top of the overhyped stock market, proof of weapons network, capital market, collateralized Bitcoin obligation, credit default swap, Bitcoin, shitcoin, tokenized, securitized, and financialized version of Bitcoin with 65 different middlemen and counterparty risk and humans and stupid things in the middle. In fact, it went down 50% in one day as a result of you deciding that you want to have somebody else buy your Bitcoin for you, and that you're going to rely upon someone else saying that I'm going to buy startups and I'm going to invest in different things and I'm going to leverage the Bitcoin. And now David Bailey goes down in the Bitcoin Hall of Fame as the Bitcoin treasury guy, where the stock went 96% off its peak. And there were probably some beautiful little insiders that dumped their stock on top of you and then bought Bitcoin with it. I hope that this is an investment lesson for you. And we all have to learn the hard way. I've made every mistake under the sun. In fact, if you go to my blog on simondixon.com, go to the blog section and type in mistakes, you'll find a blog post where I go through all of my mistakes. I've been involved since 2011, 14 years. I made every single mistake for you. And I've drawn upon the conclusion that all you need to do is simplify your life and own Bitcoin in self-custody. And there are a multitude of reasons why you need to do that. But I really hope anybody that was involved in that has learned something. And they're not now looking for the next shitcoin cycle and when altcoin cycle is going to come and what the next meme coin is. And they didn't end up buying some congressman in America that is launching their shitcoin and their meme coin. And you're not falling for that. And instead, you are learning how to self-custody. And I hope some of you followed my advice and actually went for the weekend and studied the free guide that I gave everybody that you can find on my blog on how to self-custody your Bitcoin with Andreas Antonopoulos and myself that went through that. That's completely free for you on simondixon.com when you become a free member of Bitcoin Hard Talks membership portal. What other things did we see? Well, the best Bitcoin treasury company, the one that I speculate is controlled by the asset Michael Saylor, and that is Strategy. Now, they were meant to be listed on the S&P 500, and so they had a bit of a correction in their share price because it wasn't included in the S&P 500. What does that mean? Including on the S&P 500 means you get wrapped into ETFs. And when you get wrapped into ETFs, it means all of those passive investors that don't own their own Bitcoin in self-custody and rely upon BlackRock to buy those 500 stocks for them because they can't buy those 500 stocks individually, it means that you give more power to BlackRock to become a passive investor, and they have to buy more and more shares in Strategy. And as they accumulate a bigger position in Strategy, they will influence the direction of the company and make sure that Strategy and Michael Saylor becomes a member, a person that works for the board, and the board works for the shareholders. And the largest shareholder has influence over the board, and you become an asset for the Proof of Weapons Network. Once you are an asset for BlackRock and the Proof of Weapons Network, you become part of a portfolio management theory. And when they need to turn Strategy into a discount to net asset value on the Bitcoin, they have the tools and the ability to do that. And when they need to acquire it at a discount, should they choose, they have the ability and the tools to do that. And you are subjecting yourself to those market forces. But if you own Bitcoin in self-custody, you do what BlackRock's doing. You keep your Bitcoin, you don't worry about them. And that month, when you're buying Bitcoin every month, you get to buy it cheaper. And the more they dump the price down, the more you get to accumulate more with your fiat currency. So Strategy was not included in the S&P 500. I am pretty sure it will be at some point, because Robinhood also was another portfolio company, an early company I invested in. They're now in the S&P 500 from their crypto play, their tokenized play, and a regulated broker that allows people to buy stocks and has a very large retail community. I am pretty sure MicroStrategy, now it's called Strategy, will be there eventually, and it will be majority held by State Street, Vanguard, and BlackRock, and a tool for the proof of weapons network eventually. So I'm sure it will be there soon. I hope you've learned your lessons, but that is their number one weapon. The number one weapon in their Bitcoin industrial complex that Wall Street is looking to acquire in this two-tiered Bitcoin economy. Bitcoin with them and Bitcoin with us. And you want to be with us in self-custody rather than Bitcoin with them, so that they can engage in all the pump and dumps on the short time, because we now have this fixed money supply that Wall Street can't change. So what do? They look to get your Bitcoin. They can acquire Bitcoin at a discount whenever they choose to net asset value, as I said, and they can do all sorts of tricks as well. So what else are they building right now? Well, they are building 3 new weapons, and they are launching them as fast as they possibly can in this transition to a multipolar world where there will be currency wars. And in fact, there are currency wars, because the dominant dollar is going through exactly what we're going to be describing in part 2, a weakening of the dollar strategically by the proof of weapons network that is a global institution that is invested in multipolarity. And so what are they launching in the Bitcoin market or the crypto market? Well, weapon 1, the new weapon of the 3 new weapons, is about to be launched. They got approval for a crypto index ETF. This means that passively, they won't just be buying Bitcoin, they'll be buying shitcoins. And everybody will pile in saying, what else do I have to buy apart from Bitcoin? They can't distinguish between the crypto market and the Bitcoin market. And so they'll be looking for additional returns. And that means that passively, the more people that invest in it, the more they'll have to buy all the other cryptos. And as BlackRock gets more and more crypto, they'll apply, just like they are for ETH right now, in order to stake that and be influential in the governance of that. Because only Bitcoin is proof of work in those top cryptocurrencies. And this one is proof of stake, which means by owning the currency, you get a vote in the network, just like a share. Whereas Bitcoin doesn't do that. By owning it, you don't get a vote. You get a vote by running a node, and you get a vote by mining, and you get a vote by holding it in self-custody, and you get a vote by contributing to the open source developer community. And obviously, they would like to attack all of those different parts of the ecosystem so that they can pump and dump crypto that the Silicon Valley VCs all got their insider deals and dirty little mutts on those pre-mined fiat currency shitcoins that everybody's looking through ignorance to try and find out whether it's going to become the next Bitcoin. And hopefully over time, you will learn what is the difference between Bitcoin and crypto. Crypto is a tool of the proof of weapons network. And with crypto ETF funds, they're going to become significant holders, not only at the Silicon Valley level when they do the pre-mined shitcoin venture capital deals in order to pump up the illiquid stocks that they can't sell and try and generate additional returns to attract more capital so that they can leverage it and borrow more and then dump it on your 401k pension now that Trump is opening it up to private equity. And they will obviously want to stake any proof of stake in order to gain control over these different quote unquote decentralized networks. Understand the difference with Bitcoin? Now, what is the regulators doing in order to facilitate this deregulated environment within the crypto industry? Well, from now on in, anything that has a futures market on Coinbase, i.e. Coinbase has created a financial weapon of mass destruction in order to manipulate and hedge the price of these different crypto shitcoins. They can now, as long as there is a futures market, they can apply to have an ETF. And so if you can persuade the new gatekeeper, Coinbase, in order to create a futures market and create a financial weapon of mass destruction so that people can short and make money off the down and the up, then based upon that, you can then get an ETF, and then BlackRock can control a massive chunk of your network. And then they can get more and more of the different parts of the ecosystem so that BlackRock can take us to this Orwellian real world asset, tokenized everything nightmare that the proof of weapons network wants to take us to. All because you couldn't see the difference between crypto and Bitcoin. So anybody that has a futures market on Coinbase can now apply to get an ETF, and there will be an accelerated and fast track process in order to get your financial weapon of mass destruction approved by the Securities and Exchange Commission for trading, so that nobody owns that asset, they own a stock instead. This is the BlackRock playbook. This is why they created Aladdin technology, in order to get the Federal Reserve to use it so that they could buy Barclays iShares and crash various parts of the during the global financial crisis. And their technology was used by the Fed in order to basically borrow some money, give it to BlackRock so that they could buy Barclays iShares, so that all these ETFs were under one roof, which is now an $11 trillion asset manager. This is the BlackRock playbook. That is weapon number one that they are building. And all of the newbies, all of those crypto decentralized number go up, pump and dump gamblers are all cheering back BlackRock along, because all they care about is gambling rather than investing and building something sustainable that can allow them to escape the proof of weapons network. They are empowering the proof of weapons network. That's why we need more and more people to watch Bitcoin Hard Talk, because weapon number two is being constructed as we speak. NASDAQ has now filed with the SEC to allow tokenization and blockchain listings of stocks. So it's not enough for them to take a company and turn it into a security. It's not enough to financialize it with derivatives. It's not enough to create a tokenized insurance type of product. It's not enough for them. Now they need to create a shitcoin on a stock, on a derivative, on a company, and go further and further down the curve. Why? Because 70% of the whole US economy is service-based. And what is the largest sector in the service-based economy? Financial services. And so financializing and getting financial weapons of mass destruction is a vital part of rolling over this debt-based fiat currency proof of weapons net Ponzi scheme. So that is the Goldman Sachs playbook. So now we got weapon one, the crypto ETF fund. We got weapon two, which is the tokenization and securitization of stocks on blockchain. And what else have they got? Weapon number three. Yes, it's the covert central bank digital currency, i.e. known as a stablecoin. And while stablecoin have their advantages, it is full reserve banking backed by the credit rating and the debt of the US government. It is still a financial weapon of mass destruction for the proof of weapons network. So we had an announcement from Tether, and Tether is going to be launching USAT. USAT is basically it's US regulated dollar-backed stablecoin under the Genius Act. And the Genius Act was a mechanism for finding a new market to dump all of America's debt on so they can roll over the debt-based Ponzi scheme, and at the same time perpetuate weapons of mass destruction through the dollar stablecoins around the world in a desperate last grasp. Because when we go through the macro, people are selling those treasuries outside America as they buy gold and exit the dollar as their reserve assets. So who did Tether appoint in order to have this newly regulated, Genius Act compliant US stablecoin? Well, he went to the White House and he hired Bo Hines. And so the CEO of Tether, USAT, is now Bo Hines after his career within the White House under David Sachs from the PayPal mafia, while Elon Musk builds his stablecoin social credit score nightmare, and Trump builds his World Liberty Financial stablecoin nightmare, and all of the banks and financial institutions take the Genius Act and turn their reserves at the Federal Reserve into a stablecoin nightmare. And they get to have competitive where they can pay the yield and other people can't pay the yield, while Trump goes around, does deals that allows for dollars to be perpetuated around the world, backed by dollars in his stablecoin, so he can cut himself millions and millions of dollars as the price of the US debt and the yield goes further and further higher. Of course, presidents are not elected, they are selected by this proof of weapons network. And their reward is they get to get rich as they steal from everyday Americans, everyday Europeans, everyday Brits, everyday Australians, everyday Canadians, and anybody that Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan managed to financialize and securitize into an ETF. So BlackRock becomes the asset manager of that country with no affiliation, no loyalty, no nationalism, and no care for the population, as long as they can get their cut and they get their quarterly returns. And in fact, speaking of quarterly returns, a bit of a side point, Trump put forward that they want to move from quarterly reporting to 6 monthly reporting. That's how it's actually done in Japan, or maybe even annual reporting. I'm not sure if this is going to progress. There's a couple of sides to that. It can inspire a bit more long-term thinking, but knowing the proof of weapons network is a vital tool for them to commit more fraud in that 1 year and not have to have the oversight of quarterly public reports. It's a bit of a debate, but at the same time, remember Tether, they announced in 2024 that they made $13 billion of profit, making them more profitable than both BlackRock and Citibank on full reserves. And so Tether getting into the US market is essentially a way of maintaining and trying to do it compliantly. We'll see what happens in this two-tiered stablecoin market with Tether with all the vast liquidity. But what is behind Tether outside of the US? Well, now Tether is the largest holder of US treasuries as a stablecoin, of course. But in the entire world, it is ranked number 18. That means that it owns more US treasuries than the country of Germany, the country of South Korea, and the country of Australia. 3 nodes on the proof of weapons network. The central bank, or the Reichsbank, when it was replaced and worked with the Bank for International Settlements, and after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when you had the German central bank, it just became a node for this dollar perpetuation through the euro dollar market. Australia, another node. And South Korea, after the Korean War as well, another node for the technical industrial complex, as well as the financial industrial complex. So this is essentially weapon number 3 is the JP Morgan playbook. Use money creation and getting the government deeper and deeper into debt in order to provide a digital dollar, which was constructed in Jekyll Island in 1910, that led to the Federal Reserve Act in 1913 and the creation of all dollars under the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, like the JP Morgan Chases and various other banks and members as well. So this is essentially, stablecoins is one weapon that they can use in order to make you the bag holder of US debt. Now, there was a bit of a conspiracy theory circulated around from some of the members of Russia. And in Russia, some of the members of the government claimed that the US is using crypto policy as a weapon. And so interestingly, they use the same language. I wonder if these people are watching Bitcoin Hard Talk. I wonder how far we are getting in terms of people watching it. I rely upon you being able to share it so that more and more people can see it. But it's interesting that people are starting to declare some of these crypto products as weapons. And so what was his name? Sorry if I butcher this name. Anton Kobyakov. He basically serves an advisor to Putin on international issues. And his statement basically accuses the US of using cryptocurrency. Let me make sure I get. So cryptocurrency promotion in order to manage their $37 trillion national debt. So I'll quote from the translation, and obviously I don't know how accurate the translation is, but a video circulated with the translation underneath it. Quote, stablecoins like USDC, which was created by Circle, that I, full disclosure, was a investor in a long time ago when they were a Bitcoin business, and USDT, Tether is partner with Bitfinex. I invested in Bitfinex after they had the 2016 hack in order to support victims. And so they essentially, full disclosure that is, they are digital currencies tied to the dollar and backed by US Treasury securities, as we explained. So every single stable coin, you put $1 into the bank account, a new stablecoin unit is minted, which represents $1. It can be traded in for $1. And then they take that dollar and they buy some treasuries, lend it to the US government. The US government then has to pay a yield in exchange for that. And then they take that yield and they buy Bitcoin and then they invest it in Bitcoin mining. So that's what Tether does. But they're pushing stable coins as a mechanism for pushing US debt. And so the claim is, the allegation is that US pushes global adoption of stablecoins, which indirectly funds its debt by increasing demand for treasuries. That's true. Quote, once adopted widely, US could initiate or devalue the dollar. Now, this is a bit silly. Of course they're going to do that. They always devalue the dollar. Now, there's two parts of devaluing the dollar. One is devaluation of those locally that spend in dollars. And the dollar's lost 99% of its value ever since the creation of the Federal Reserve. But then there's the international markets, which is the dollar priced in other currencies. And we'll go through it in the macro that it is actually being weakened relative to other shitcoins and other nodes in the proof of weapons network. And for the dollar to be weakened relative to them is quite an achievement, because the dollar is a shitcoin, but the rest of them are meme coins relative to the shitcoin. And so the claim is that it will devalue the dollar, slashing the real value of that debt. So the debt, you basically roll over the debt, you devalue the dollar, which means that the $37 trillion is now worth less in real time. So if you price dollars in gold, the price is crashing. If you owe $37 trillion and you can dump it on somebody else, then in real time, you're losing value relative to other currencies and gold. And so global stablecoin holders would suffer losses as their assets lose purchasing power. Now, I get the claim, but this is how the system works anyway, because it's a debt-based Ponzi scheme. So the stablecoin, while it is true, everything he is saying, it is true even if they don't do the stablecoin strategy, because this is just systemically how the dollar works. It is a Ponzi scheme. So he then goes on to say, this mirrors US actions in 1933 when it hiked gold prices to devalue the dollar by about 40% amid the Great Depression, which is true. And so by hiking gold prices, when the gold price goes up, the value of the dollar goes down. You can buy less gold with your dollar. And then we had the pump of the 1920s, the roaring 20s, followed by the Federal Reserve constricting the market and then sending the market into the Great Depression. And then the Great Depression led to the confiscation of all gold, where Americans were forced to hand in their gold and swap it for a Federal Reserve note. But by hiking the price of gold, then you got less gold for your Federal Reserve note. And this was done during the Depression in order to, devalue essentially the debt that was created from World War I. So it also echoes, quote, it also echoes the 1971 when President Nixon ended the dollar gold convertibility, allowing dollar devaluation to ease economic pressures, which is absolutely true. In 1971, the US had to default on its debt after the Korean War. You had Nixon that was after, you had essentially John F. Kennedy. After his assassination, there was LBJ. After LBJ, then there was Nixon. And the Nixon shock in 1971 was when they defaulted on their post-World War II Bretton Woods order, where they forced the world to go onto a dollar standard with the belief, with the promise that you could convert your dollars into gold. Because after all the wars, 75% of all the world's gold ended up in Fort Knox. Now, I believe the Federal Reserve has collateralized it many times over because there's no ledger, there's no blockchain, there's no auditability, there's no properties like Bitcoin where there will only ever be 21 million. You can mine more gold as the price goes up. But anyway, this absolutely did happen. And in 1971, America effectively defaulted on its gold, and the world entered into the fiat currency standard. We're over 50 years into that experiment right now, where the whole world ends up this dollar milkshake theory, essentially. Everybody ends up having to accumulate dollars and then lend it to the US government. And then the US government perpetuates covert wars in order to force everyone onto a dollar standard. And from that, terrorism essentially got a deal with the Saudi Arabia where they could price their oil in dollar, creating the petrodollar, create Europe into a dependency, creating the euro dollar. Because they had 75% of the gold, price that gold convertibility in dollars, which they defaulted on, and then build out the military industrial complex where you had to buy your military equipment in dollars, the financial industrial complex where they use the dollar as a tool for financial weapons of mass destruction through the IMF and debt slavery, and also the consumer industrial complex where they used all of this debt in order to build products, so people had to buy them in dollars. And then you had this massive overvaluation of dollars that we're in right now, where China became the manufacturing base, America became the consumer, and now we're resetting that order based upon the trade flows. But the proof of weapons network has now fully vassalized America, and that is a global network of financiers that are investing globally with no America First agenda. Well, anyway, this creates the economic pressures, and that's what has led to the creation of that proof of weapons network as well, where governments are subordinate to the financial industrial complex that was built there as well. So anyway, basically the suggestion was, and it's a little bit of a convoluted argument, there's truth there, there's some history to learn, but that's how the system is designed anyway, without the stablecoin or with the stablecoin. But certainly they are using the stablecoin to try and roll over that debt-based Ponzi scheme due to the lack of external foreign demand for those dollars, as more and more are moving to gold right now. And Bitcoin is becoming a tool in the currency war, which is why they've created so many weapons in the US by the proof of weapons network to get your Bitcoin rather than you hold it in self-custody. And that, if there ever is a confiscation, will be the Bitcoin that's confiscated, and you will most likely receive some kind of stable coin or central bank digital currency, depending on where we are in the cycle. So anyway, this kind of suggests that the US is going to devalue the debt by promoting stable coins. And this is essentially crypto tied to USD, backed by US treasuries, which is driving global adoption in order to fund that debt. Once they've done that, once they've got their stablecoin adoption, they're going to pump and boost the price of Bitcoin and gold to basically draw value away from fiat currencies, while basically using Fed-backed systems like JP Morgan and various other nodes in the proof of weapons network in order to maintain that USD dominance. And at some point, they can decide when they want to crash a system, and you, as somebody that has it in self-custody, will just be able to buy it cheaper, and you'll be immune from such pressures, which is why it's so important to self-custody. Okay, I think that's enough on that story anyway. What else did we have? So the Trump family knows this. The Trump family are trying to accumulate desperately as much Bitcoin as possible and launch stablecoins so that they can buy as much Bitcoin as possible because they know what's coming. While they're telling you that they're making America great again, they're hedging against America and the dollar using Bitcoin. So the Trump family has now added $1.3 billion to their net worth, it was reported, due to Bitcoin and their crypto investments, according to Bloomberg. I estimate it is probably more than that, but they are on a rampage to short the dollar and long Bitcoin while they implement the policies to do this crypto scheme and stablecoin scheme as well. And what else do they need in order to do that? Well, they need partnerships. And those partnerships relate to the macro environment as well. So it was announced this week that the US and the UK, yes, that's the same UK, where I went and met Boris Johnson and told him about the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve Strategy in 2013 through the UK Digital Currency Association that I was a founding director of when I was trying to support the UK in not ending up in the situation that they are right now and building a Bitcoin strategic reserve and making it legal tender. And Boris Johnson laughed me out of the room, is now being told by the US via Trump, who is subordinate to the financial industrial complex that is a node in the proof of weapons network, that they need to partner with the US and the UK in order to announce their new crypto cooperation deal, which means that they will stablecoin, tokenize, and financialize every aspect of the UK economy so that it can be weaponized for BlackRock's interest against the interest of the British people. That is what this is all about. And they won't build any Bitcoin strategic reserve. My understanding is that UK confiscated about 60,000 Bitcoin that they still have. And I don't think they sold it like Germany, but maybe we'll get an announcement that they have sold it. We're still trying to figure out whether the US has any or what the extent of their Bitcoin strategic reserve is. And we're still trying to figure out whether the US is going to audit that gold. And I think it's there. But I also think it is on both the Federal Reserve balance sheet and the Treasury balance sheet. And that was all the gold that was stolen from the American people, taken away from all the colonialism and the transfer from the British Empire to the American Empire, transferred from Russia when it was replaced by communism in the Soviet Union and Wall Street funded the Bolsheviks, and also the German gold when the Bank for International Settlements transferred the gold that was confiscated from Czechoslovakia and various other countries that the Nazi regime was invading and transferred it over to the Federal Reserve, which created this Bretton Woods system, which created the promise of the 75% of gold backing, which led to the default in 1971 and the remnants of the final moments of the debt-based Ponzi scheme that we are experiencing right now that is creating so much wealth inequality. We'll be covering much more about that in part 2 as well, which is why you need to protect yourself with Bitcoin, because fiat currency is designed to break you, turn you into a debt slave, lose your value so that you need to give more time to exchange more of your time for less value while you'll become a node for pushing up the value of assets for those that own assets, while you're putting your money in a bank account that they can take from you at any point, that is like a melting ice cube that is making you poorer and poorer and poorer as you save more in the shitcoin fiat currency proof of weapons network, whether that be GBP or USD or euro or yen or whatever it may be. It's going to be used as a way for the US to further vassalize the UK, and they're going to use stable coins and tokenize real world assets, and that's going to be the extent of the partnership. It ain't going to be good for Britain. It's going to be great for the proof of weapons network, which you only profit from if you own US shares and US assets, or you exit the system with Bitcoin or gold. But this train is never going to get stopped. If you are a neighbor of America, you're going to be pushed into that scheme as well. And so to commemorate this, what did Trump do? There was a picture that circulated around on X of Trump is a golden statue the president of Trump holding up a Bitcoin, which was placed outside the US Capitol while he visits Buckingham Palace in the UK and sits around a table with all of the most important members of the proof of weapons network that he essentially works for, in confiscating wealth and giving people a golden statue of Trump holding up Bitcoin to rub it in your face that while the proof of weapons network was taking over the almighty US empire, switching it into a multipolar world, creating a K-shaped economy that's causing civil unrest within America, Europe, UK, across the whole network, he is there saying, I got your Bitcoin, I got your gold, and I put a statue here while I celebrate in Buckingham Palace with King Charles and the remnants of the Rothschild families and those that created this system, and sit around the dinner table while so many Americans are broke, pretending to make America great again. So it's all very symbolic. So what I wanted to do as the final part of this, before I go through part two, is I wanted to go through some of the different technologies on the proof of weapon network. And I thought this would be the appropriate place. I didn't know whether to cover it here or in the macro section, but I thought I'd cover it here. And that is that I want you to understand how these deals, like with TikTok, I wanted to create a bit of an educational piece from my background when I worked in investment banking, investing in private equity and various other experiences. I wanted to break down this TikTok deal. So we're meant to get an announcement today of how the TikTok deal is constructed. And there is a December deadline. And it's being negotiated between Trump, we're told, who is a proxy for the proof of weapons network, where he is subordinate to them. He's negotiating a deal for them, not for Americans, and negotiating with China. And obviously China is sovereign because no company, there is we covered in previous episodes the Shanghai proof of weapons network, but because they have a state banking system and the government doesn't let a corporation get bigger than the CCP, I went through the nuances and differences. You're welcome to go back on my blog and check in Shanghai proof of weapons network if you want to understand the difference between the US private one and the China one. But they are negotiating, and by December we should have a deal. And so, Azad, I'm going to ask you to play our first AI summary, where I took the construct of what we know about the deal and combined it with some educational material so that you understand how this financialized and securitized globalist type of construct works. So, Azad, let's play the first video on TikTok.
Welcome to the deep dive. So, you've probably seen the headlines about TikTok. The U.S. government wants its American operations sold off by the end of 2025. Officially, it's all about national security, right? Protecting user data from, foreign eyes. But today, we're looking at some analysis that suggests there's something deeper going on, that this isn't just regulation, it's strategic consolidation.
Exactly. We want to unpack this idea of the proof of weapons network, POW for short. The argument here is that the TikTok deal isn't really about banning something perceived as a threat. It's more about pulling this huge platform into an existing American power structure.
Okay, POW network, we'll definitely get into that. But first, maybe let's just quickly lay out the deal itself. What are the basics? So by December 2025, TikTok US gets spun off. About 80% U.S. investor ownership, a mostly American board, and this is critical. One board member appointed directly by the U.S. government, plus all the U.S. user data has to live on Oracle servers here in the States. That's the mandate.
Mm-hmm. And that requirement, the Oracle part especially, fits right into this POW network concept. Now, when we say POW network, it's important to understand this isn't some, backroom conspiracy theory. It's presented as a structure.
A structure, not a conspiracy. Okay, what's the distinction there? You mean it's more about how the system is inherently set up, like market forces and who holds the money?
Precisely. It's about how capital flows, how technology gets used, how finance operates, even how consumption patterns are shaped. It's systemic. These different parts, they don't necessarily need secret meetings to coordinate. Their interests, their balance sheets, they're already intertwined. And this structure, It leans on four main interlocking complexes.
All right, let's break those down for everyone. You mentioned the first, the FIC, Financial Industrial Complex.
That's the big one. Think global asset managers, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, huge players. They provide stability through passive investments like ETFs, index funds, but they also wield massive influence through voting shares, ESG mandates, and you've got banks like JP Morgan acting as sort of shock absorbers, and private equity Blackstone, KKR, as the, let's say, financial enforcers restructuring companies.
Okay, FIC, got it. Then there's the TAC, Technical Industrial Complex, big tech.
Right. Your Apples, Microsofts, Googles, they look independent, but they're deeply connected to government through subsidies, export rules, huge Pentagon contracts. And, crucially, they rely on those big FIC banks for capital, for buybacks, things like that.
Makes sense. Then the more obvious one, the MIC Military Industrial Complex.
Yeah, Lockheed Martin, companies like that, they have guaranteed customers, basically, thanks to defense budgets, less exposed to normal market ups and downs.
And the last one, the CIC, Consumption Industrial Complex. This is where TikTok fits in.
Exactly. Platforms like TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, they're described as attention pipelines. They shape culture, deliver ads, but increasingly they're seen as tools for, well, information campaigns, maybe even psychological operations.
So bringing it back to TikTok, the argument is the deal isn't just about data privacy worries. It's about integrating this massive CIC asset directly into that whole POW system.
That's the core idea, binding it in.
Okay, so how does the money side, the FIC control, make that happen? We know U.S. investors like Oracle, Silver Lake, KKR are involved in the potential purchase.
Right, but here's the twist. Who owns large chunks of Oracle, Silver Lake, KKR, and pretty much every other major player? It's those same big three passive managers. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. Their ownership is everywhere.
So even if the direct owners change, the ultimate financial oversight, the governance layer from the big asset managers, stays in place. It just gets tighter.
Pretty much. The capital structure gets locked into the existing financial governance framework.
Which makes the TikTok integration via Oracle really significant. It's the physical choke point, like you said. Hosting the data domestically under U.S. law, using infrastructure potentially linked to government and intelligence needs, and the algorithm itself, even if licensed, runs under U.S. technical supervision.
Exactly. That's the technical binding.
And then the MIC leverage and CIC absorption. TikTok isn't making weapons, obviously.
No, but controlling the information flow, shaping what millions of people see and talk about, that's incredibly powerful in today's world. Think hybrid conflict, narrative control. So folding TikTok US into this framework means aligning that cultural influence, that consumption engine, with broader US strategic goals as defined by the POW network.
It really reframes the whole justification, doesn't it? The official line is accusing China of potential influence.
Which leads to this idea of accusation is a confession. The analysis suggests the U.S. isn't just neutralizing a perceived threat, it's seizing the same tool for itself. Instead of asking for a back door into the data like in the past, they're essentially building a front door by mandating this structure.
So at the end of the day, who actually wins in this scenario?
According to this framework, it's the overarching financial industrial complex. The huge asset managers, the private equity firms, their power comes from controlling the capital, the balance sheets. Nationality is secondary to the system itself.
So the takeaway really is TikTok US isn't being saved or secured in the way most people think. It's being absorbed.
Absorbed by capital, yeah.
Yeah.
And repurposed within this proof of weapons system, it becomes a strategic asset.
Governed less by the free market and more by financial structures and intelligence oversight.
That's the final thought, really. It becomes a permanent part of that POW network infrastructure. A fascinating and maybe slightly unsettling way to look at it.
Okay, so always remember, Oracle, where did it come from? Remember the way that the system is constructed. The debt-based Ponzi scheme always needs to roll over debt. That means that the largest borrower is through the US Treasury market. Stablecoins is a new mechanism for increasing and rolling over that debt. That debt needs a bigger and bigger budget, which means you always need justification for war. The US military industrial complex feeds into the financial industrial complex and the technical industrial complex and consumption. And so to roll over the debt forever, they need to create narratives. Those narratives are pushed through the media. The media has now become social media. And so they need to control the algorithms in order to make you believe that you're always in danger. And when you're in danger, they profit from wars and make you think that you're the good people. And these CIA assets like Oracle are created as companies where essentially that budget that they stole from you, if you don't own assets, then you pay the inflation, you become a debt slave, but those people that own the assets benefit from the appreciation. So the government gets bigger and bigger and bigger based upon this Federal Reserve System. They have to always issue more treasuries. They end up being a bigger and bigger part of the economy. Wealth inequality goes further and further to the left and the right. And then you have these fake entrepreneurs that are given Pentagon budget technology that was created by the government, that's then privatized, financialized, tokenized, securitized, and turned into these products where they get to pretend they're these genius entrepreneurs because they get access through the Cantillon effect to borrow money at 0% or cheapest interest rates so they can pump up the price of their stocks. And you call this capitalism. This certainly ain't capitalism, because capitalism requires hard money. So how do you enter into a hard money environment? You have to exit the system if you want to be in hard money. There's only two ways I know of doing that. That's gold and Bitcoin. And Bitcoin's the only one that allows you to do it in the digital sphere with auditable supply, where the supply doesn't increase the higher the price goes. And no central bank can control that. And so all they can do is persuade you to own your Bitcoin with them rather than you holding it in self-custody. And so always remember, Oracle is just a node in this construct. And it is CIA funded in the beginning. And they make you think that this is something else, but it was made with Pentagon budgets, just like Elon Musk, just like Peter Thiel. And they have to work for this financial industrial complex. And so then they may be able to borrow money into their VC funds, where they get to control the cost of capital or the ability to access capital, and they get to be shareholders in all of these crony capitalist deals. So you have Silver Lake, you have Andreessen Horowitz, you have KKR. Some of them are public companies, and they are vassalized into the network, and therefore they're able to manipulate markets. And they have partnerships with this TikTok deal will be General Atlantic and various other people and nodes in the network. And what are they going to do with this? Well, this is one step closer to the US social credit score. You got a FICO score. You've got Palantir contracts that are using pre-crime social scraping and data. You got all of your data being centralized. You got stable coins. You got real world assets. You got programmable centralized money. And then what are you going to be doing? You're going to be combining it with nodes from the Pentagon budgets like Elon Musk that pretends he's giving you freedom of speech. He gives you freedom of speech so that you can keep talking. And when you talk, you provide the algorithm. They won't give you freedom of reach if they don't like your message. And it will be integrated into your stable coin. And you can cheer it all along thinking that America is winning while it turns the whole system into this end game of what the Federal Reserve wanted to do in the first place, which is what the Bank of England did to Britain, bankrupted the country, reset the world order, and moved to a different order. When it was the British Empire, they had a new host country to move it over to, a vast manufacturing base with vast resources, which was the American Empire. And the American Empire switched from colonialism to neo-colonialism via financialization, securitization, and now tokenization. And nothing changed there. It's the same model. So that is where we are at the moment. And that is why TikTok is an important component. I just wanted to give you that. And we just got one final story before we move to part two. It's a very short story. But Kazakhstan, the president of Kazakhstan has basically ordered the creation of a Bitcoin strategic reserve for its country. So we may have countries that want to remain sovereign or free themselves from the IMF or the Belt and Road Initiative and be able to fight back against the proof of weapons network at a sovereign country level. So we will keep watching Kazakhstan, as we will keep watching the Kingdom of Bhutan and El Salvador and various other countries that are going for this strategy. And we will keep covering it within Bitcoin Hard Talk. Now, just before we move over to part 2, I want to point to a few resources. We are about 1 or 2 subscribers away from 102,000 subscribers. We got our little YouTube silver Proof of Weapons Network medal. And in case YouTube decides that they want to take us out, there's a few things I need your help with. Firstly, make sure the algorithm, put a comment below, like, share, subscribe, hit the bell symbol, hit all so that you get notifications. They don't give me traffic. I rely upon you. And also, if this gets shut down, Tether has actually invested in Rumble. So that's a different type of network. And they're looking at doing Bitcoin Lightning integration and various other things. I'd like you to go to Rumble right now and start getting ready in case we get censored over here. So go to Rumble, type in Simon Dixon, and follow me over on Rumble, because we're going to be doing some more streams over there as well. So make sure you come over there, and we'll start doing some more exclusive ones as we get more and more of a following. Now go over to Apple if you use Apple, or Spotify if you're on Android, and go to your favorite podcast app and type in Bitcoin Hard Talk. This way, when we give these long talks, you can download them and you can chunk them down into pieces and watch them bit by bit while you're driving, while you're in the gym, and you can help me have a backup in case YouTube and Rumble cancel me. And so then you've got Apple and Spotify, and I know we're in all the different Proof of Weapons Network nodes, but I have to be productive. I boycott wherever I can, but at the same time, we've got to get our message out, and we've got to play within the confines of what we do. I test out various decentralized ones. Put in the comments section right now. I've gone on to Nostr and various other ones, but let me know in the comments section what you would like to see, and maybe we can start looking at some of these more decentralized ones. But we got to get the numbers. We've got to get the message out to as many people. Finally, we've created our own website, simondixon.com. And in case all else goes wrong, I'll be giving webinars through the Bitcoin Hard Talk free membership portal. Now, if you go over to the blog, you'll see a 5-part blog series. And I'd like to share with you how to protect yourself in many of these mind wars at the moment. You can do that without signing up, and you can just watch the videos, read the blogs, and at the end of it, it will tell you how to self-custody your Bitcoin and give you a course on the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. That's completely free. There's no agenda there. I just want as many people in self-custody. There is one agenda. If you sign up, you give your email, and I'll put you on my newsletter. The reason I put you on my newsletter is because I want to notify you every time I go live and make sure that you get custom information as well. Completely free. I'm just trying to protect myself in case any of these Proof of Weapons Network nodes, technical, industrial complex, warfare weapons start being weaponized against me. So please do all of that, and I will keep giving content. Share this with as many people as possible. We got the whole episode. We put it on a blog. We break it down into AI summaries and shorter chunks. And also we break it down into 3 videos in case you want to say, just share the Bitcoin part and you don't want to share the macro and geopolitical part because maybe you have a reason for that. So we will keep doing that, and we will keep pushing out the content as we transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. Do me a favor. I need to get to 102,000 subscribers right now. So if you're not a subscriber and you watch this and you like what you hear, then that's all I ask for you in return, so that we can get over to 102,000 subscribers and get to the next stage. So with that in mind, let's move over to part 2 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 98, Who Assassinated Charlie Kirk? And in part 2, we cover This Week in Macro. And for This Week in Macro, what are we going to be covering? We're going to be covering the construct of fiscal dominance, artificial intelligence, and we're going to be going through how Europe is being used in order to crash the economy using energy and why that is actually happening. So I'm going to quickly take some water, and then we're going to move into part 2. Welcome back to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 98, part 2, This Week in Macroeconomics. The bigger episode is about laying the foundation, both from a Bitcoin perspective, a macro perspective, to tie into the geopolitical perspective in part 3, where I want you to have the foundation knowledge so that we can follow the money and make some theories on who killed Charlie Kirk. And I'll go through why that's relevant and the different 2 operations in part 3. In part 2, we're going to be covering everything that happened this week in macroeconomics and what it actually means now we are deep into the fiscal dominant cycle. That may sound like a bunch of jargon, but I want you to understand what that actually means and the implications. I also want you to understand that artificial intelligence and energy are the only ways of combating this inflationary cycle that we're moving to. And so I want you to get how the US proof of weapons network is currently crashing Europe using energy and what the implication of that is. So let's jump right into this week in macro, part 2 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 98. So the first thing, obviously, I need to cover, the most important story, is the very essential node of the proof of weapons network. The Federal Reserve has cut rates by 25 basis points. And so we are now into a cutting cycle during inflation. There is only one way to justify cutting rates during inflation, which is to make up some unemployment data in order to justify it, because the Federal Reserve obviously works for the banks because the banks are the shareholders, and the financial industrial complex has one of the largest lobby groups and pays for the president and Congress and Senate and can bribe the judicial. And so the president works for, at least partly, the financial industrial complex, which is one part. And so if we got a 25 basis point rate cut, then this is just a token gesture, because in an environment where the government is bankrupt and for monetary policy reasons, there is no justification for cutting, there is only one justification, and that is because the Trump administration and the financial industrial complex need to roll over short-term debt, which has got nothing to do with monetary policy. That is fiscal policy. Fiscal means spending by the US Treasury. It means tax, it means spending. That's fiscal policy. Monetary policy means what you do with interest rate and money supply and the various other tools that the Federal Reserve has. So in order to justify a 50-point basis cut or a 25-point basis cut, you need to recognize that this became optics. So if Jerome Powell from the Federal Reserve did a 50 basis point cut, because Trump has been campaigning for a 300 basis point cut, which has never been done in the whole history of the Federal Reserve, it kind of shows that you caved into Trump. But if you don't give the 25-point basic cut, then you're kind of slightly keeping the illusion that you are an independent and don't work for some kind of different agenda, even though we know from any long-term listener of Bitcoin Hard Talk that both the Federal Reserve and the Treasury work for the same financial industrial complex, because that's how it was constructed in the first place. So essentially what happened here? Well, they cut it by 25 basis points rather than 50 basis points. And that was completely predictable. We went through the percentages and what the markets and prediction markets and financial markets were saying, and it became a very highly likelihood that it was going to be 25 basis point cut. So this does nothing to the market, but it kind of shows that directionally rates are going to be cut so that you can move into a cycle of rolling over the debt short term, which has a horrible impact on the long-term debt. The rate that the government needs to pay on the long term is getting worse. Had a little bit of a correction. It got slightly better over the last few weeks, but directionally it's getting worse. And so all you can do is manipulate the short term and keep rolling over your debt every few weeks with shorter and shorter debt, which is an emerging market, distress market strategy that always happens by emerging markets. We're on the wrong side of the IMF and they're being attacked and they're in a currency war in order to vassalize them into the US proof of weapons network, which is why now the network is doing it on itself. It is vassalizing America and the collective West further and further and further into this stateless entity where government are completely subordinate to it, and even the Federal Reserve is just one component working for its shareholders. So you'll get a bunch of rhetoric as a result of this. Now Trump can kind of say, whatever happens next, it was Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve's fault. Blame shift, it wasn't me. At the same time, it can continue to fuel the debt crisis, roll over the debt, and whatever the consequences are, Trump can blame it on Jerome Powell, and you get that MAGA narrative that, you know, kind of pushes the narrative that's needed. At the same time, the people that are cheering on, or people that are demonizing, saying, hey, Jerome Powell, when they both work for the same people, they are getting, if they don't own stocks, they're getting poorer and poorer and poorer. If they're not in the top 10%, if they're not in the top 1%, then this policy is getting worse and worse and worse for them. And Trump can continue to pump all of this money into stocks like Oracle that get the TikTok deal that we covered in part one, and other types of deals like Intel, as the US government essentially is getting closer and closer to the assets that they need to pump for the proof of weapons network, as America has shrunk into this regional power and shrinks back, and therefore is doing this vassalization strategy that I've been talking about for months and months and months on Bitcoin Hard Talk. So this is what we call fiscal dominance. Fiscal dominance means that the government spends more and more and more, rolls over more and more of the debt, and monetary policy becomes less and less relevant. And really, it's about pumping assets, exiting those positions while you reset the world order, and the government foots the bill, and the government creates more and more of this crony capitalism types of deals. And that's essentially what Trump was installed, not elected. He was selected by the Proof of Weapons Network in order to have this tariff policy and execute this strategy, which is being a very good boy to the network right now while he pretends that he's in charge. But anyway, they needed the justification because the problem is that inflation isn't at its 2% target. And they're telling everybody that we're trying to get inflation to 2%. Now, with 2% is bad enough because that's cumulative inflation. That means it's 2% on top of a price that already what most Americans couldn't afford. But now it's going to be systemically higher than 2%. And so how do they justify that? Well, they need the second part of the mandate, which is unemployment. So if unemployment is getting worse and more people are losing jobs, then they can justify why they might need to pump the market so that people can borrow more, and companies can borrow more, and therefore they can employ more. And that's the justification. Even though we're moving to this world of artificial intelligence, where essentially we're seeing more and more Silicon Valley players being imported through immigration, particularly with India. And at the same time, we're seeing more and more locals hit the unemployment. And so what did they need to do? All of a sudden, we had a massive correction and change right before the rate cut due to what they called fraudulent reporting of unemployment data. So they blame shifted the data, saying there was fraud that was in the unemployment data. And now all of a sudden, just by magic, there was a massive increase in unemployment. And in fact, it was the largest negative revision of jobs in history. So suddenly we had over-reporting of almost 1 million jobs between March 2024 and March 2025. Now, some people could say, well, is that Trump being fraudulent? No, this was during the Biden administration and during the Trump administration. So this is proof of weapons network operations, as opposed to, saying this is some partisan thing or political thing. So as if by magic, all of a sudden, the short-term data gives them exactly what they need in order to cut interest rates while inflation is not reaching its 2% target. What was the reaction, or what was the lead up to that? Well, stocks were pumping like crazy and reached new all-time highs. Real estate is pumping like crazy and reached new all-time highs. Bitcoin is close to its all-time high. It's had a little bit of a correction, but gold pumped like crazy and reached its new all-time high. In a normal functioning market, you would expect some kind of negative correlation between stocks, real estate, and gold. But when we're in a market where everything's going up because the dollar's getting weaker, then it's not that these assets are actually going up. It's that the dollar is getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And if you price any of these things in gold, real estate's not going up that much. Stocks aren't going up that much. And in fact, foreign markets are going up more, despite the fact that they are more in distress with the real economy, because fiscal dominance means all we do is we turn the entire economy against those that don't own the assets for the benefit of those that do own the assets. And so Trump is running the economy as hot as possible, which is a decoupling of the real economy to these asset price valuations. And when you have companies that have no reflection in fundamental value, you can no longer take the price and the earnings, and there is no reality. None of the models that people are analyzing these stocks make sense anymore, because we have moved to fiscal dominance, where money is essentially created in order to push the K-shaped economy where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The whole thing is about asset price inflation. Nothing else matters. Nothing stops this train. So gold passed $3,700 for the first time in history. Now, what's happening in the real economy? Well, in the real economy, people are feeling this. They're wondering why they're choosing between eating and heating if they don't own stocks. They're wondering why all they can do is service their debt, while their savings in their bank just get worth less and less and less. And that's causing a lot more tension. So in the real world, people are struggling, and they feel gaslit by being told that everything's good. And so we had in France, by Macron, who's a node operator for the proof of weapons network, he got a no confidence vote. And so when you are no longer a useful asset, you get downgraded by Fitch. And so France's credit rating got downgraded. That creates massive pumps in the yields on the French bonds. And you had, new all-time highs and a massive spike in the cost to lend to the French government. What happened in Japan? Well, the Bank of Japan, that is now strategically realigning, where the Bank of Japan was simply a tool for pumping US stocks, it seems to now slowly be refocusing on its region rather than just being a tool. And so the Bank of Japan has decided that it's going to start selling off much of its assets. And it started hiking rates for the first time. Rather than allowing people like hedge funds to borrow at 0%, hedge out the currency risk through derivatives and then buy many different types of stocks, is now moving to real hikes of interest rates, which is resetting the economy. And it's deciding that it's going to start selling off its assets. Now, there is a difference between America and Japan. Japan has like a 230% debt to GDP. America has like 125% debt to GDP. But Japan has massive surplus assets. It has a massive capital surplus, whereas America is always going deeper and deeper into a deficit. So it compensates for that by printing money. And so because it has the world reserve currency, it just pumps the debt-based Ponzi scheme, whereas Japan accumulates assets. But now it's deciding, as it focuses on itself, that it's actually going to be selling off some of its assets. And so we had the Japan prime minister resigning. We had the yield going up in terms of the cost of lending to the US government. The economy is strong, but it's got this massive debt issue, but it's offset by this massive surplus that America doesn't have. And so what are they actually doing? Well, they might be taking, and who is the largest lender to the US government? It's Japan. So Japan is the largest lender and purchaser of US treasuries. And so it may be taking those assets, selling America's debt, America's treasuries, which means that you then sell those dollars, you buy your local currency, and then you lend it to your local government. This is the reverse dollar milkshake theory in reversal mode. And so the Japanese bonds, JJB, the yield, could lead, this could be a signal that is leading to the selling of US treasuries in order to buy more Japan bonds. And so therefore, they're moving more towards the real yield rather than the fake yield that really is the reverse Japan carry trade as well. So Japan is now protected by their vast amount of their current account and the assets that they hold. And that is at both the private level and the public level as well. So the Bank of Japan and the government actually hold vast amounts of assets, as well as the public. They're a nation of savers. While there is massive debt, it is offset by assets. Similar to China. China has a consumption problem when people stop spending because they don't take on debt, but they own 99% of Chinese people own real estate and have savings and have assets. All they're doing is they're stopping spending, but that doesn't exist in America. America, when they stop spending, they need more debt. And that's the difference. So how much debt does Japan have exposure to the US economy? Well, it's got $1.2 trillion in US treasuries. So they could start selling those US treasuries, which would weaken the dollar further. And then they could sell, that leads to them selling dollars, buying yen and investing it in lending it to their own government and buying JJBs. So shorter term bond yields are essentially going up, including up to the 10-year yields. But the longer term bonds are actually correcting a little bit, the 20 and 30-year bonds. So if you want to lend to the Japanese government, they're going down slightly. And so what that is saying is that if you want to lend to us short term, you get a higher rate. But if you want to lend to us long term, that's contracting. So the difference between shorter term and longer term is the gap is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, which is the opposite of how it should really be, which means that we are getting a change in policy. And so this is a new, this is a new policy. And so I think that ties into this multipolar world order and Japan negotiating further to the east and moving away from the west. But we'll keep watching that. Inflation was slightly less than expected in Japan. But what about the second largest purchaser, the lender to the US government? Other than the internal in Cayman Island, which is the financial industrial complex and other people's money, who have you got after Japan? You got the UK. The UK is the second largest lender to the US government. Do you not think that this is why UK is being vassalized? They are literally using the UK, which is bankrupt, as a piggy bank for Ukraine weapons to buy US weapons from the military industrial complex, at the same time as getting the UK to prop up the dollar through this pound dollar market and lend it to the US government when the country is completely bankrupt. And so the yield on UK gilts, which is the UK bonds, they're spiking like crazy, just like the ones are the longer term ones, just like they are with France as well. Now they're starting to go up. And so we're starting to see this trend right now. So what does Trump do? Well, Trump comes and visits Buckingham Palace in the UK. And that was to ensure that they're keeping, I think personally, there was definitely a conversation to make sure that you're buying more and more of these UK, you're using more and more of the UK in order to buy these bonds as well. And so we're getting this weakening of the dollar. So we're not sure exactly what's going, but it's interesting timing that you suddenly get, while the UK is being weakened more than ever, Trump hanging out in Buckingham Palace. And I'm sure that if Japan and UK started selling US bonds, then you would expect to see yields become more and more unaffordable for long-term US debt. And this could really accelerate this need to do the fiscal dominance and roll over all the debt on the short term. So UK and Japan are vassals for the proof of weapons network via the Bank of England and the Bank of Japan. So whenever the global proof of weapons network wants to reset the world order, they can just start selling down some of those US treasuries by the UK and Japan, and we'll keep watching those trends. That will give us a signal on when things are changing. So this is hence why Trump needs short-term rates down, and he's arguing with the Fed, going for the fiscal dominance strategy, and installing as many Fed board members into the Federal Reserve as possible, because it needs those short-term rates down. There is no justification. We're getting this massive manipulation of data, and the foundation of what made America investable to foreign countries, that led to the milkshake theory, that led to sucking up all of these currencies around the world and the structural bid on the dollar. Many of those are being challenged. And people, I think, are getting the message. The difference between Japan and US, as I said, is US has nothing to sell. It's only got debt to sell. And so where is this going? It's moving more to that stablecoin internal type of market as well. Very, very interesting thing. America can only print more debt, which means it needs you, consumers, to borrow more. It needs the corporations to borrow more, and it needs the government to borrow more, which is why you get the big, beautiful bill. And we're moving to that cycle of government shutdowns and debt ceilings going up to 5 trillion and fiscal dominance. So the whole promise of the Trump administration has completely bowed down to the proof of weapons network as well. Maybe they've got gold, but we don't know. It hasn't been audited yet. Maybe the Federal Reserve has already collateralized and rehypothecated all of that gold as well. We don't know. The Trump administration said that they would do an audit. Now, could that be used as a tool whenever they want to do a complete reset? Well, we've got all of these tools now. You've got the UK, you've got the Japan, you've got the gold audit, you've got the Fed, which is now integrated into fiscal dominance. You've got the lobby, the financial industrial complex that controls Senate, Congress, and potentially judicial bribes. So now you've got full-blown US vassalization, and you're starting to see it more and more and more. We're starting to see like these different members and node operators, like the Bill Ackmans of the world. What are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to merge Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We've covered this on many different episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk. As a quick recap, these were the organizations that guaranteed all of the mortgages behind the mortgage-backed securities and the credit default swaps and the collateralized debt obligations that were used by the investment banks and the financial industrial complex to essentially prop up and make real estate unaffordable for the most, and make it the piggy bank for the financial industrial complex as well. And so remember, during the 2008 financial crisis, essentially to prop up the entire system that was about to implode, you had Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which became basically the government became shareholders in these public entities. You had these private-public partnerships. This allows for the military, the financial industrial complex, and the proof of weapons network. How many times am I going to say that in the video? I'm going to keep saying it. You can count it below how many times I say it. I got to come up with a better way. POW. That reminds me of proof of work anyway, but maybe we're going to come up with a different one. It allows them, to socialize the losses and privatize the gains. That was the model that came from the global financial crisis. Vast wealth was made by those, including Bill Ackman type of people, that were able to get on the right side of these deals. And so Bill Ackman, that was the same guy that tried to buy Silicon Valley Bank and came up with Peter Thiel, crashed the banking system, and tried to buy and get the government to socialize the losses and privatize the gains. But now the US is essentially a shareholder through their warrants, and there could be a restructuring in order to privatize those profits as well. And it looks like Bill Ackman is at the front of it. We keep seeing this Bill Ackman character come up time and time again. If you've been watching in part 3, we'll be going through Charlie Kirk. And if you've been watching any of the Candace Owen drama, there has been some drama between Candace Owen and Bill Ackman in relation to his role as an agent for the Israeli government and negotiating a $150 million deal. We'll go through that a little bit more in part 3, allegedly. But here's the important point. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are the backbone of the entire US real estate market. Those organizations collectively can make or break US real estate. Any type of mechanism of utilizing that. So now we've got all of these different tools that I talked about with fiscal dominance. But what if you also had the US real estate market? What do you need to do? You need to make it into a financial product, financialize, securitize further, maybe even tokenize. And then you can decide when to crash the real estate market or keep it going or keep it pumping. And you can do that within a few moves just by switching up the balance sheet as well. So they want to get Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac want to expand their business after merging them together, making them public, restructuring the cap table. And what do they want to get into? The new business model is mortgage trading. So this is when you create financial weapons of mass destruction, mortgage-backed securities, credit default swaps, derivatives, tokens, all sorts of stuff on the US real estate market, which subjects it to full vassalization by the proof of weapons network as well. So this is the asset stripping exercise that I've been talking about all the time. This is essentially turning the entire US real estate market into a shitcoin. You can basically, take something that was in the real world, a mortgage, something that people need to live in when you've got record homelessness, and you financialize it into a mortgage-backed security, and then you sell it to your pension via these ETF inflows, and you insure it through credit default swaps, and you slice them and dice them and create these different types of financial weapons of mass destruction. Then you turn them into public shares, and then you create trading markets and markets on top of these mortgage-backed securities, credit default swaps, collateralized debt obligations. And then what you do is you turn it into a crypto shitcoin and you tokenize it. And what is Trump going to do? Trump's coming in on the deal. He wants his cut as well, just like he wants his cut within all of these different, assets. If this is not the remnants of a debt-based Ponzi scheme in its final asset-stripping moments, trying to scrape the barrel of everything you can extract while your people are suffering, then this is what happens. And this is exactly what we're seeing right now. While those that own shares, they're all cheering along. They love it. Oh, get those interest rates down. Those that have their ETFs, get those interest rates down. This is a complete raping, pillaging, and asset stripping of everything in the US. And then you'll probably just turn it into a real world asset, which is a classic proof of weapons network play. And you'll even have carbon credit tokens to gain access to energy, social credit scores. You'll probably be able to trade your social credit scores as it integrates into your stablecoin in this Orwellian nightmare technocracy that we seem to be moving towards closer and closer and closer. Remember, the US is 70% service, 30% goods. The largest sector within the service economy of the US is financial services. So this really has no reality. The economy and the reality of the people is getting further and further and further away. And the whole economy is just pumping the bags of the richest and the richest and the richest, which is causing more and more tension. The US is becoming a shitcoin. And that was reflected in the dollar. The dollar DXY went back below $97. So it had the little pump. It was about $102. It's come back down further. And this is priced against other shitcoins like pounds and euros and Canadian dollars and Japanese yen. And so we're getting that correction, which means that we're getting these capital outflows as a result of this tariff policy and shrinking America into this regional power. So what do you need to do in order to turn America into a regional power? Well, we covered it all last week. We talked about the different operations, the exit from the Middle East using Qatar strikes and Israel as a proxy. We talked about the Venezuelan strikes. We talked about the escalations of drones into Poland. Let's take a little bit deeper look into how you combat some of this inflation. Everything within fiscal dominance is about asset price inflation, and that then goes down into consumer price inflation. But what if those commodities start pumping? Then you get the real inflation as well, because they're inputs for all of the production. That then leads to increase in prices. And the only thing I can think of that's left in order to create any type of combating disinflationary force is artificial intelligence. But AI makes the unemployment data worse if it replaces jobs. And then you get the justification that the Federal Reserve used in order to cut rates despite inflation getting worse. So the whole thing is betting upon unemployment to create disinflation through artificial intelligence, which is why the whole world is being reset in this new AI data center world that we're moving to, which is a vital part of the technocracy. So you have these different types of deals that are being negotiated, right? So how do you make sure that you can get the best deal with Europe and UK? Well, you turn it into a war zone. So Ukraine started to attack some of the Russian gas and Russian oil refineries. I think that could be a proof of weapons network play, not to win the war, not to try and escalate peace, but to make sure that the US has further pressure under the proof of weapons network, with Europe becoming more and more vassal into that US side as well. So if the US pressures higher oil prices, which is the result of such an attack, so we had a real correction in oil, which would help some of this deflationary pressure. And immediately the POW attacks these oil fields, which leads to a bit of a more of a correction in the oil price, which leads to higher oil prices, which reverses the impact that they need. So this creates more and more, of a reversal of any disinflationary force. So the Financial Times, which is owned by the Proof of Weapons Network as a mouthpiece, it states that the US is demanding Europe to halt Russian oil and gas purchases as a moral and strategic imperative, quote, to starve Putin's war machine and tighten the screws on Moscow until a ceasefire or peace deal becomes inevitable. So last week I went through in a separate video, you can see what the Poland escalation means in the geopolitical side, but we know that's all BS. They're not negotiating peace here, and there is no incentivized to move towards peace, both from Russia and the US Proof of Weapons Network. So this is actually basically turning Europe into a shitcoin because it's going to be tokenized through what we covered in part one, the UK and US crypto bill and alignment as well. This is not going to do anything to harm Russia. This is not a sanction on Russia. It's essentially designed to render European energy dependency in complete line with the proof of weapons network interest, the Chevrons, the Exxons, as I covered last week and went into a bit more detail. So we got announcements that Chris Wright, who is Trump's energy secretary, and he basically stated that Europe's continued reliance on Russian liquid LNG gas is undermining the collective sanctions effect. And so they're using sanctions rhetoric in order to destroy Europe further and make it a dependency into Exxon, Chevron, and various other nodes as well. Basically, he's just tying the argument of the security and using words like allies, not foes, in order to cannibalize itself. And that's why we ended up with all these Starmers and Merts and Macrons that are getting so unpopular, but they're being good people for sending all of that money back and securitizing, financializing, and tokenizing. So essentially, the narrative is that the shared goal of ending the war in Ukraine, which was a CIA operation, military coups, all the documents were on WikiLeaks, leaked by whistleblowers, complete, POW CIA operation. They're basically wrapping morality in order to obscure the underlying economic directive and the direction that this is all taking Europe. At the same time as doing their open border policies, at the same time as having node operators like Tommy Robinson pushing out different narratives that is creating the civil unrest. At the same time as Europe negotiating a trade deal for the proof of weapons network, not for America, where essentially Europe needs to spend $750 billion in energy consumption, but that needs to go towards Chevron and Exxon. And that's got to be done under export deals by 2028 under the EU-US trade deal. So basically, in other words, Washington's willingness to escalate basically sanctions and various other financial weapons of mass destruction, and they're making it out like they're firing them on Russia in the name of peace, but essentially it is Europe buying or America buying Europe and using the different fossil fuels as the narrative that they need. Sanctions can become leverage, and it's not on Moscow directly. We've already seen that it's not impacting. This is the 19th round of sanctions on Russia, and it's doing nothing because it built this BRICS network where, basically it pivoted across to Asia. So all of these sanctions are being said that they're on Russia, but they're on Brussels. And this is a real problem for the future of Europe. And this is why you're seeing this distress in economies like France and UK, and those longer term yields going higher and higher and higher. They're weaponizing collective pressure. They're enforcing compliance with the US, and they're using, trade targets as the narrative and the justification. Why are they doing this? Because remember what I say, the lobbies control the governments. So there is a massive liquefied natural gas, LNG lobby. It is enormous, and it has massive influence over Washington. And so Trump is doing everything that he needs to do for his financial backers. So the financial industrial complex is loving it. Tokenize, financialize, securitize, collateralize debt obligations, all the things you need to do. Trump is delivering all these Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac real estate deals. And at the same time, the military industrial complex is cashing in. They're cashing in on all of the tensions that happen. They get to sell more and more weapons. They get to negotiate with NATO, pushing that euro-dollar market. And so all they need in order to execute this is the narrative that Trump is pushing out to everybody, and all the BS that Starmer's pushing out to everybody, and all the fear porn and fear-mongering BS that is being pushed out to everybody right now, because people just can't see through the woodwork. So, Azad, what I'd like to do is I'd like to push out some classic propaganda that is sponsored by the Proof of Weapons Network, by its government representative, because now we're not even pretending anymore. We used to have a little bit of pretense that America was defending itself and all of these budgets were needed for defense. But now the Department of Defense is called the Department of War. And in order to make that announcement, a new rebranded video needs to go out there in order to make America feel like they're making America great again, while they're being shrunk into the Proof of Weapons Network. So, Azad, let's play the little clip and the advert of the War Machine.
You know, we won World War I, and we won World War II, not with the Department of Defense, but with a War Department.
We're focusing our military on its core mission, crushing America's adversaries.
We're in the business of war fighting.
So welcome to the Proof of Weapons Network sponsored video release of the military industrial complex and the financial industrial complex in full force. Mask off moment. What you are witnessing across the UK, what you are witnessing across US right now, what you are witnessing across Europe is what happens when the Proof of Weapons Network takes full control and uses the very same tools that they used on the global south, on the Middle East, on Asia, decade after decade after decade, and say, we can't do that anymore because there are competing powers. So we need to retreat, and the revenue needs to continue and flow. And fiscal dominance, backed by the war machine, is the strategy. And so it's cannibalizing upon itself. And that is what that advert is there. It's to make you think that, and be more honest, that now in this world, we can move to the Department of War and be more honest rather than calling it the Department of Defense. So, have you noticed how all of a sudden we don't have narratives around renewable energy and climate change? Seem to have disappeared. Why? Because that was utilized in order to get Europe to switch off its renewable energy, while China was the only one that could actually invest in it, which destroyed the manufacturing base of Germany, while they stopped taking on their nuclear energy power plants. And they made it where, by installing leadership into Germany, they created full vassalization, as we're seeing right now. So Europe is essentially being, replacing the, Russian hydrocarbons and switching it all to US hydrocarbons, which are significantly more expensive and means that you have to put your full risk into America. And when America is your neighbor and they're changing the Department of Defense to the Department of War, you better be careful. The real sanctions are inverted. The US claims that it is putting sanctions on Russia, but it's actually been putting sanctions on Europe. They are sanctioning. So essentially, all of these different energies are being scaled back because the narrative has changed. And the end result, more tokenization, more financialization, more securitization, more bailout, more printing. And basically, Russia has already hedged across to BRICS and already started doing its Asia partnerships, and the sanctions are not working. So the strategy to pump the war machine, to pump the proof of weapons network, is to move more into the war economy. Now, I definitely believe we've avoided World War III, but I also believe that America is going to be cannibalizing upon its neighbors. So Europe is completely structurally weakened right now. I can't see the reversal of this. It's completely deindustrialized. It's got a service-based economy, and all of those services are being utilized over to propping up the US service debt-based Ponzi scheme. Now, right now, everyone's complaining about the highest energy prices in England. So we're getting soaring energy prices, and people are choosing between eating and heating again. We're getting diminished independence. And, what appears to be solidarity while Keir Starmer is sat around with, King Charles and Trump. And it looks like everyone's aligning against Moscow. Moscow's laughing. Europe is completely locked into US dependency, and US don't treat you so well when it needs to roll over a debt-based Ponzi scheme. Okay. Trump's entire energy policy is essentially from Europe over to the proof of weapons network. So why do you think he had that whole narrative around Greenland? Because Greenland has rare earth minerals. And Greenland has about 50,000 people that are not really happy about their colonial overlords with Denmark, but I'm not sure they want to replace it. They want independence. And so we may get a ratcheting up of that narrative at the same time as the Venezuela drug cartel narrative, which we covered last week. CIA operations that are doing the drugs. But if you want to, get more access to those Guyana, Chevron, and ExxonMobil deals, that's what you need to do. Now, what happened right before Trump came to Buckingham Palace? And who did he bring with him? We had a massive meeting in the White House with the technical industrial complex. In fact, 30 members of the technical industrial complex, the elites that were given Pentagon budget in order to create these technologies, they were all crammed into the White House, and they all sat around a dining room, and they filled the whole meeting as well. Who was there? Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Tim Cook, and then 5 executive of Silicon Valley companies right now. Remember the structure. You have the executives that work for the board. The board works for the shareholders. The shareholders are able to install the board by getting majority shareholding. The mechanism for getting majority shareholding is ETFs. The largest creator of ETFs is BlackRock. And so in order to install a board where the executives work for them, you have this trade relationship with India. And so while Indians are building artificial intelligence for Silicon Valley companies, and Americans are being laid off because they're building this AI and robotics center, and they want the temporary workers, which is why Elon Musk went nuts when he pretended to be anti-immigration. But when everyone was talking about the need for the H-1B visas from India, he was taking people out, like on the, he was taking people out on X and removing their check marks. But around that table was essentially a bunch of Indian CEOs. Sorry if I butcher some of the names, but you had Satya Nadella, which is the CEO of Microsoft. Sorry for the names. Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google. You had Sanjay Mehrotra from Micron. You had Vivek Randreve, from Tibco. and you had Shyam Sankar from Palantir. So you have the board members and the executive underneath. We seem to be having a trend here right now. Could that be the relationship between the I in the BRICS and why we've had these trade wars that I've been covering, and why Modi was at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? But anyway, all of these executives, they had a combined net worth of $50+ billion. Apple said that $600 billion would be committed. Google said $250 billion. And Microsoft said $80 billion annually. Where did that come from? The financial industrial complex. Elon Musk didn't show because there was this whole Epstein thing going on. But all in all, around the table, $1 trillion plus auction based on billionaires that are nodes in this technical industrial complex, got access to financial industrial complex money in order to buy American policy. And those are the people that were sat around in Buckingham Palace telling the government how they need to print some more money in order to reset the world order. Now, all of these companies are global companies. And I covered the connection and the integration with the China and the difference with the China proof of weapons network. But what have we seen as a result of this? Why is the dollar weakening? It's weakening relative to other countries. There is capital outflow while managing those risks as we have this controlled shift. So this year, China stocks have significantly outperformed US stocks, even though US stocks are at all-time highs. But if you price it in gold, they're not outperforming because fixed price assets are doing better. Now, this is the same for most of the major emerging markets. And why is that? Because the dollar is weakening, which is what I told you on April the 2nd. The Dollar Liberation Day was a proof of weapons network operation that I speculated was by Larry Fink in order to liberate the world from the dollar under a MAGA narrative. So dollar is weakening. Stocks are at all-time high. Gold is at all-time high. Fiscal dominance is at all-time high, which is pushing the K-shaped economy, which is pushing the assets that the proof of weapons network controls at the expense of everybody else that doesn't own the assets. 90% of all the stocks are now owned by 10% of Americans. And on top of that chain, the top of the chain is owned by, you could have foreign investors as well. And this is why there is no America first agenda. This is why we're seeing a civil unrest strategy. This is why the US is transitioning to this US technocracy. This is why the tariff policy was implemented in order to have the wiping out of small business, just like we saw in COVID. And you're getting record bankruptcies, but the proof of weapons network at the top are controlling the politicians, resetting the order. And who do they work for? They work for the financial industrial complex. And they're even getting the administration to repossession deals so that they can control the narrative in order to justify the war, the Department of War, and all the money that they get to print to manufacture these wars. So that's everything I've got in this week in macro. That's how much gets covered in 1 week now. They are drowning us with news flow. And I try and cut down what is important and see through the BS in order to help you follow the money and recognize so that you can protect yourself as we transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. Now, just before we dive into part 3, which is where we're going to cover 2 operations on the geopolitical side. What I call, I won't ruin it, it won't be a spoiler alert, but we're going to go into a follow the money rendition of the Charlie Kirk assassination. And I'm going to go a little bit deeper into some of the narrative and how that relates to the announcements that followed the Israel striking in Qatar, and try and wrap this together into a bow of what you can do next and what might happen next as well. So I'll take a little bit of a water break. During that time, what I'd love for you to do for me is if you watch this video and you're enjoying it, please follow me on X if you're not following me already. I live stream over there. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. We're about to pass 102,000 subscribers. I'd like to get to the next phase. If you're enjoying this, then please be a subscriber. Please put a comment and a like. Please help me with that. Also, I'm going to be doing exclusive streams over in Rumble and test out there. So I need to build my following over there. We stream this over in Rumble. Please join that. It is going to be doing some stuff with Bitcoin Lightning integration. I won't monetize. I never monetized any of this stuff. I don't do sponsorship. I don't do monetization. I don't do ads. I just want to build a community of people that are protected themselves as we make these vast transitions. So also you can get the podcast version of this if you want to chunk it down into bits and download it, both Spotify and Apple. And also head over to simondixon.com, get yourself a free login to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, where I give you guides to self-custody, how to exit the system, and everything is free over there as well. And in exchange, I can email you and update you as these new updates come through, so that you can stay on top of the trend as we transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currency. So that's everything for part 2 this week in macro, Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 98, where we covered the fiscal dominance, the artificial intelligence, and how Europe is being sacrificed through energy and false narrative. In part 3, we're going to be covering this week in geopolitics. So I'm just going to take a little bit of water and I'll be back in a second. Okay, welcome back to part 3 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 98. Who killed or assassinated Charlie Kirk? And of course, we don't know the answer, but I'm going to follow the money and go through an update on exactly what I covered last week. And most of what I covered last week ended up happening. And I'll try and dig into what I think is important for you to know and what's not important for you to know and understand, so that you can see ahead. And I'd also like to tie it together with the second operation that I think is happening simultaneously and how I think they are tied together. And so I'm going to answer the question of a theory, and it is a conspiracy theory. I am theorizing and analyzing on a conspiracy that is happening in real time, because we won't know the truth. And so we have to speculate, because you definitely can't trust what the FBI is selling you right now. And so I'm going to answer the question of why would Israel assassinate Charlie Kirk if they did, and how to actually interpret that differently to how everyone else is interpreting that. And so if you're a long-term listener of Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know that way before the assassination of Charlie Kirk, I talked about the US operation, which I call divorce and blame shift. And because Israel is a node that represents the military-industrial complex, part of the US proof of weapons network, and Trump is a representative of the financial industrial complex, there's a bit of a power struggle and portfolio management going on, and a multi-decade operation to switch narratives so that aligning with Israel becomes very unpopular, so that you can turn it into a toxic asset, but at the same time, blame shift and reset people's narratives from the very, very top. And so I believe that there is an operation to make people believe that US is so ethical and the proof of weapons network is completely blackmailed and controlled by Israel. And it's not that any of these leaders would engage in pedophilia, it's because that pesky Epstein had to blackmail them. Forget the fact that they found themselves in a position where they're blackmailed because they did the deed. We're led to believe that it was all accidentally done because these very ethical people needed to be paid off, because they would never normally do this. Not that they are actually prostitutes for their own cannibalization, and that you need to be distracted with believing that it's about the left and the right, when Israel is a US colony. And yes, your government is that evil. And to think that this is only something that Israel would do, as we are seeing it in its sheer brutality, we're learning that our governments have been doing this all along. And that is causing a lot of cognitive dissonance in the mind of a lot of people. And so in order to facilitate that shift, Operation Divorce and Blame Shift is happening because the world order has reset. And I've talked a lot about it. I'm not going to go too deep into everything. But I believe that this Operation Divorce and Blame Shift is in full swing right now. And I think what we're witnessing is two operations. And I speculate and theorize that part of this conspiracy around Charlie Kirk might be involved. Now, you need to decide. And the reason I'm going to tell you that is that even if it's not true, because it is a theory, but even if it's not true, it's still being weaponized in the same way as if it were true. Okay. So my speculation, as I said, is that the military-industrial complex via the US deep state was the organizer. And I think they did that because Charlie Kirk dead was as useful an asset to them as Charlie Kirk was when he was alive. And if you think that the deep state won't do that, which is a subset of the military, then you haven't learned how your country really works yet. So Operation 1, I believe and theorize that Charlie Kirk was assassination wasn't just some crazy mentally ill person. I think that it was organized. And I'm happy to be wrong. And as soon as the evidence comes through that I am wrong, I'm not addicted to this narrative because they'll use it anyway. As I said, and I covered previously, this is a useful tool that they will use even if it was organized by them or not. And Operation 2, which consisted of Strike Qatar, and when I was giving live commentary, when it was happening in real time, people were panicking, saying this is World War III. And I was saying, no, I think Qatar knew. And I think the whole region knew. And I think we're going to get a bunch of theater as a result after that. And the end result is that America is going to look increasingly isolated because it didn't fulfill its security agreement. And Israel is going to look like a pariah state that is going to be increasingly weakened as new relationships get formed that kind of change the structure and the utility of Israel to the military-industrial complex. And then Trump representing the financial industrial complex and Netanyahu representing the military industrial complex, we're going to start to see different types of operations to make that clear. And I'm going to go through the nuanced detail and how I interpret it by following the money and the wider geopolitical trends. As I said, could be wrong. I don't think I am. But the first thing I'm going to do is I had a tweet on X, or a post we call it now, that demonstrates exactly what I said last week, that this will be used like a damn Jerry Springer show that gets lots of traffic all around, and all sorts of narratives will be put out there, and this will become like a TV show. So I tested that out. I put out a list of things that could connect this operation to why it might be an Israel operation. And I got over 6 million views across 2 posts, one with a video and one with a list of things that could connect it to Israel. And that really demonstrates exactly what I was saying last week, that everyone can pick their narrative. And I do happen to believe that this is the correct narrative, but most people don't understand the full operation because they'll use this just to say it was Israel without the context of who does Israel work for and who's on top of that chain. So with that in mind, I wanted to create a quick AI summary of the tweets that I put out and combine it with the Proof of Weapons Network summary and my analysis. And we're going to play the final AI summary, and I'm going to go through the different parts and components that were there. draw a theory on what the assassination of Charlie Kirk, why it happened, and then we'll go through Operation 2 and all the events that happened this week that back up the narrative that I think Qatar knew, and we have actually hit a new stage in where Israel goes next. So Azad, if you could play the AI summary of the Charlie Kirk operation.
I gotta be careful the way I say this. They're gonna try to ethnically cleanse Gaza. I mean, I don't use that term lightly, okay? They're talking about basically removing 2.5 million people from there, okay? And honestly, they have a mandate to go seek justice and revenge. They do. This idea that they need to have a truce or a peace treaty, that's morally after you see women and children be burned alive and dragged to the streets.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something huge, Simon Dixon's X-Post from September 14th, 2025. It went incredibly viral, millions of views, and it's about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. But it's not just about who pulled the trigger. Dixon dives much deeper.
Much deeper, yeah. Our goal here is to really unpack Dixon's whole thesis for you.
Yeah.
We're looking at three main things he draws on. There's the list of connections from Jackson Hinkle, then Kirk's own words, specifically about Gaza right before his death, and finally, Dixon's own quite sprawling geopolitical theory connecting it all. He calls it the proof of weapons network.
Okay, let's get into that. Before we even talk motive, what is this proof of weapons network Dixon keeps mentioning?
Right, so Dixon describes it as this powerful, almost shadow financial structure. It's supposedly rooted in decades of black market trafficking, think weapons, drugs. He argues it was set up post-World War II, involves elements of intelligence agencies, various mafias, and basically funds covert operations globally. It's a mechanism not tied to one country.
Got it. A mechanism. And the sources, particularly Hinkle's points that Dixon shares, they suggest Kirk somehow became a threat to this mechanism.
Exactly. The narrative laid out is that Kirk started as, well, almost groomed by pro-Israel forces, a real loyalist. But then there was a shift, a turning point.
Yeah, the sources list specific examples, right? Kirk apparently started pushing back, said Epstein was Mossad, lobbied against the Iran war, and maybe most significantly, reportedly refused a big funding offer from Netanyahu himself. He even apparently told people he feared Israel would kill him. This shift led to him letting anti-Zionist voices speak at his events, which was a huge change.
And that's where the video clip Dixon shared comes in. It's Kirk talking just before the assassination. He's explicitly saying Israel's intention was to ethnically cleanse Gaza, talking about removing 2.5 million people. For Dixon, that kind of talk, well, it crossed the line.
Made him a liability instead of an asset.
Precisely. A major liability to the established order, according to this theory.
And Dixon also highlights the immediate aftermath of the shooting. He points to things he finds highly suspicious.
Like Netanyahu tweeting condolences almost instantly.
Yeah, that. And Israeli media apparently being the first to confirm the death. Plus, this detail about a private jet near the scene, owned by a Shabbat Lubavitch donor, disabling its location data. The sources also mention Trump insiders apparently disputing the official FBI story behind the scenes.
Okay, so linking these specifics to the bigger picture. This is where Dixon introduces his main theory, Operation Blame Shift.
Operation Blame Shift. What's the core idea there?
The core idea, as Dixon presents it, is that the U.S. military-industrial complex, this proof of weapons network, is actually engineering a divorce from Israel, a controlled separation, deliberately turning Israel into what he calls a toxic asset, a pariah state, basically.
Wow, okay, a controlled divorce. After decades of close alliance, why? Why would this network suddenly want to cut ties or at least reshape the relationship so drastically?
Well, this is where Kirk's death becomes crucial in Dixon's view. He argues Kirk dead is actually more useful to this network than Kirk alive, especially after his ideological shift. Dixon uses that phrase, once you're in the mafia, you can't leave. Kirk became unreliable, maybe even dangerous to the network's plans.
And those plans involve what?
Yeah.
Moving away from the current model?
Exactly. Dixon argues the network wants to exit the forever war model. It's less profitable now, maybe. The goal is to pivot to the rebuild phase, which Dixon thinks will be managed by groups like the GCC. To do that, old structures, old alliances like the one with Israel need to be dismantled or reshaped.
Yeah.
And blaming Kirk's assassination on elements linked to Israel helps fuel the narrative needed for this blame shift.
So Dixon then points to events happening right after the assassination as proof.
Yes, he sees a pattern. Actions that seem contradictory on the surface but fit the blame shift narrative, like blocking the release of Epstein files, maybe protecting certain network assets, then Congress banning the Pentagon from boycotting Israel seems pro-Israel, right? But then Senator Rubio pushing to revoke passports of Israel critics, while simultaneously approving over $650 million for missile defense for Israel. Dixon's interpretation is they're publicly performing support for Israel while also building tools to crack down on dissent and manufacturing public rage against Israel through events like the Kirk assassination.
So it's like stirring the pot, creating chaos.
Stirring the pot, exactly. Fueling civil unrest, maybe, which then justifies a more intense surveillance state, a kind of technocracy, bypassing constitutional norms. It's all part of managing this messy divorce, according to him.
So wrapping this up for you, the listener, what's the main takeaway from Dixon's analysis?
I think it's his conviction that we'll never get the definitive truth, the categoric fact, as he puts it, of who killed Charlie Kirk. He believes it's destined to be perpetually debated, speculated upon, just like JFK. The ambiguity serves the purpose. Narrative control is the real goal.
Right. And this leads to a fundamental question Dixon poses.
Yeah, he asks, do you focus on the person who pulled the trigger? Or do you look higher up, who paid for it, who benefits, who understands the bigger conspiracy? For Dixon, the answer is clear. The proof of weapons network is playing the whole game. The actual assassin is almost irrelevant in the grand scheme.
So the final thought we want to leave you with, based on this deep dive into Dixon's theory, if this Operation Blame Shift is real, if the goal is to manage a strategic divorce by making Israel a toxic asset, what should you be looking for in the coming months? What events, maybe legislative moves, shifts in aid, or even diplomatic incidents could be interpreted as the next step in that process? Something to watch for.
Okay. All right. So what happened since last week? Well, we have been treated to a merry-go-round of distractions with FBI releases that are completely inconsistent. We've had all sorts of fights between the radical left and the far right and racism and all sorts of every type of ideology and divide and conquer that I've been warning you about. You can pick your favorite influencer, which has been propelled into superstardom with more traffic than traditional media as a result of all kind of coming from the same Daily Wire type of network. It's interesting that they all seem to have common stories, all these influencers, and they all seem to fill a different purpose. If you want the communist route, then you got Jackson Hinkle. If you've got the racial route, if you've got the far right in different flavors, you've got Candace Owen, you got Nick Fuentes, if you want to go a little bit deeper down there. Then you've got the Christian route, and it was Tucker Carlson. And then you've got all of these different things with all sorts of different nuggets. And they're all being fueled by a group of people that all know each other and all seem to have worked together at different phases. Whether it's even Tucker Carlson, when he interviewed Putin, Putin said that, Tucker Carlson, I know you were applying for work at the CIA. And Candace Owen, who seemed to have all come from this Daily Wire Mossad operation. And maybe it's Alex Jones that seemed to have his massive multi-billion-dollar case go away when he came along. And remember Joe Rogan that was canceled and then came back after he bowed down to Spotify's agenda. Maybe it's Nick Fuentes, who also came from the same type of turning point crowd. And all of a sudden we see Bill Ackman come along. And he seems to be connected to all of these different networks. What about Ben Shapiro? Oh, right. That's another Daily Wire connection. And what about Turning Point USA and the wife and all of these different things and et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera? You are given a complete merry-go-round of distraction of every type of different narrative to get you engaged into this TV show that at the end is weaponizing assassination as a tool. And that tool is to build your social credit score and to build your profile. So I had that tweet that had over 6 million views where I basically said how people could connect it to Israel. And the prevailing narrative right now is that whereas a few years back, if you said anything about Israel, you would be called an anti-Semitic, you would be called all sorts of stuff. They're ratcheting up the other side because I believe that the media is pushing out the divorce narrative. And so they want Americans to hate Israel because America wants to say, that wasn't us. When America and Israel were one, and Israel worked for the US military-industrial complex, but now they want this plausible deniability and blame shift as well. And that's not me saying that Israel and what the crimes against humanity that have been committed there. It's just about understanding what's the top of the chain so that you can understand that you're still under the same system even once you get your divorce. And even though you might think that you have made that separation, if it does happen, they will allow these narratives to prevail in order to do an element of mind control here. So what I want to do is I'm just going to give you the list that I put out there, and maybe this will be too exhausting, of different things that connect this to Charlie Kirk being assassinated by Mossad, and then I'll give the fact that Mossad is the CIA. And then you got to ask, who do they work for? And I've said it's the military-industrial complex in the end. So the money all comes back up the chain of propping up the debt-based Ponzi scheme in the end. And it's a feeder when you follow the money. So let's go through some of these narratives. And I'm going to go through them. I'm not even going to describe them, but I'll go through some of the things on my tweet. And if I get too exhausted, then I'll just leave you to watch the tweet on its own, the post. So Charlie Kirk was groomed by Israel as a teenager. So essentially, the whole time he was paid and became a millionaire because of the money he took from Israel. He believed in Zionism. He was an evangelical Christian, and he believed in the brainwashing that Israel wasn't a prophet, and in fact, it was a land, and that you can't criticize the government. And if you do criticize the government, then you're not being good to your Christian faith. He was basically Israel's top non-Jewish loyalist, a tool for pushing evangelical Christianity, which was essentially the Schofield Bible, which is why you have so many evangelical Christians, mainly in America, because it served a goal for the military-industrial complex. So it weaponized the Jewish faith in order to get an army in Israel. It radicalized the Christians through evangelical Christianity by making an extreme interpretation of the Bible. And then it created the fake war on terror, which was a military operation in order to turn the world against Muslims so that you could weaponize all three. And Charlie Kirk was a product of that. He may not have known who he was working for. It may have been completely aligned with his ideology. But as I said, I can neither mourn nor celebrate Charlie Kirk's death because the Zionist ideology led to the death of hundreds of thousands. And it still is today. And many people aren't mourning them because they believe in this ideology. And he got paid to push that. He financially benefited from that. And when he pushed back, for whatever reason, he got taken out. And so I cannot bring myself to celebrate nor mourn that, because that is the result of that ideology. So let's take a bit of a list. So basically, he starts mildly criticizing Israel through the whole 2 years. He was doing the whole Hezbollah narrative of exactly what you're meant to say. Suddenly, he started really pushing back on Epstein. So he started saying that Epstein was a Mossad agent. Now, you weren't meant to say that before. He then said that there shouldn't be an Iran war on behalf of Israel. So now you get this slow shift of the narrative that he's meant to say as somebody that gets paid from Israel. He then apparently, allegedly, lobbied Trump against the Iran war. Now, how do we know this stuff? Because there was public footage about that. And we're meant to believe from Candace Owen of all the evidence and the text messages and all the various stuff that's being put out there. And so basically, Trump allegedly bought back at him over the Iran side. He said Israel had full control of Trump. He referred to Netanyahu as a bully after, all of this happened in the last few weeks prior to his assassination. He feared that Israel would kill him, allegedly. We're given all of these different things that are put out there. Harrison Smith basically posts about Kirk's fear about it. So we got these different types of influencers that are sharing this different types of information that had relationships with him. Netanyahu requests Charlie go and visit Israel and do the tour that Elon Musk did when he changed his narrative. Netanyahu then apparently offers TPUSA a huge funding. We're told that it's 150 million, and we're told that it was done via Bill Ackman as well. He refused Netanyahu's funding offer, we're told. He basically became completely disgusted with Netanyahu. He basically let anti-Zionist people speak at his last event on Turning Point USA, and this created a massive amount of controversy at the time. Zionist media started attacking him and turning against him. He then went on other people's podcasts and started talking about how he felt that speaking out against the government of Israel is not the same thing. Then suddenly a bunch of Zionist donors allegedly threatened to defund Turning Point USA, which was all sponsored by Zionists as the vast majority of the funding. Then Zionist funders allegedly demanded Kirk ban Tucker Carlson from speaking at his event because Tucker Carlson was speaking out, don't go to war with Iran. And if you haven't watched my live commentary of the play-by-play, where I said the 12-day war was engineered and I believe coordinated in order to reset, everyone was thinking we're going to World War III. I was saying I believe that this was an agreed transition by all regional players. You can go back to my video, a play-by-play on the Israel-Iran war and the 12-day war. Donors basically cut him off and launched attacks, and there was lots of the Zionist influencer Laura Loomer basically came out and said that Kirk is backstabbing Trump and he's a traitor. The FBI director, who was a Zionist or a proud Zionist, basically fires the chief of the Utah FBI, and this event happened in Utah. Apparently, he has an anti-Israel interview with Ben Shapiro, where he asked very tricky questions. Ben Shapiro, the Zionist from the Daily Wire. Then Shapiro comes back and starts attacking Charlie Kirk on the Mark Levin show. So we're seeing this whole connected network of influencers that are pushing out these competing narratives. So these are the new celebrities where we are meant to idol worship all of the different things that they're bringing to us as they expose the FBI, as FBI pushes out all these narratives that are completely ridiculous. Then suddenly Kirk has a combative meeting with an Israeli rabbi. And then right before the 10th of September, which was one day before the 11th of September, all these unusual people, allegedly the shooter, had all these visitors as well. The visitors had basically state license plates, so these were allegedly feds. The visitors did not give off basically a good vibe, and it's meant to be threatening was a different narrative. Charlie Kirk was then shot in a jugular from 200 yards away, and we're led to believe that being shot in the neck is different. And so now everyone's speculating, was it 450 meters away? Was it from the right? Was it from the front? Was it from the back? And suddenly everybody is now distracted doing the FBI's investigations publicly on all of these different shows. And suddenly the FBI starts leading different red herrings And we're told that here's a complete account in very FBI language of the shooter admitting to absolutely everything at every point. And then we get these different photos from different CCTVs taking us down all of these merry-go-rounds of distractions. An undefined man basically runs in the crowd with a pistol, and then suddenly they get arrested, and then they're connected to various different rabbit holes, and apparently they have a Zionist connection as well. Then the police arrest a so-called patsy, the wrong person. Everybody's focusing on there, looking over there. And they were claiming to be the shooter. So now it's multiple people involved. The patsy basically yelled out, "Shoot me," during the arrest. So everybody was focused over there. Now, a bunch of 9/11 propaganda video surfaces of the patsy. And apparently he was a witness to 9/11, connecting it to previous operations where we haven't had the files released yet. The actual shooter then flees without any type of trace. And then later we get video footage without the gun, with the gun, and then we're speculating on what happened to the gun. Netanyahu immediately tweets within minutes of it that Israel media... Let me take some water. Israel media was essentially the first to confirm that Charles's death. So that then links it to Israel having inside and premeditated information. Private jet takes off about 12 minutes away. And this private jet is basically disables the location monitoring. So that's a professional operation. We're told then the jet is owned by Chabad Labovich, which is a big Zionist donor. Netanyahu posts about Charlie Kirk's Israel trip. And so, he was meant to be doing a trip. He talks about all this. Netanyahu weaponizes it for why you should bless Israel and all the different narratives needed. The FBI then says that foreign intel are assisting in the investigation. FBI then claims they have photos of the shooter. The FBI then claims the shooter wore tactical gear. They also confirmed that an assembled gun was found in the woods area now. There was no photo that exists of the shooter with the gun. And then we get all of these different conflicting narratives. Then different photos emerge of him, during waiting for the shooting as if he wasn't panicked. No photo existed of the shooter in tactical gear, despite the fact that FBI said that. Zionists then go on social media blitz about Kirk, all saying how Kirk was a Zionist, Kirk loves Israel, all this different narrative. Netanyahu goes on a complete media blitz about Kirk, all around all the different places, saying how he loved Kirk and then saying how ridiculous it is, and that say anyone investigating this is tying it to the Holocaust narrative and all the usual different types of things in order to say, don't talk about this. And what did he do? Islamists, of course, Netanyahu said it was the Islamists that were behind the shooting, trying to push those different types of narratives. Netanyahu said that Israel didn't kill Kirk, and he's been saying that repeatedly and going on 5 different shows and 5 different TV shows. Netanyahu then reads out a pro-Israel letter, but refused to publish the letter. And then Candace Owen then comes on the blitz saying that the letter was faked. And then Candace Owen also caused on Netanyahu to publish a letter that was never actually published. And then Tucker Carlson came out and says that basically Charlie was at war with Israel now, even though he was pro-Israel his whole career. So apparently he's leaving the mafia. And so we have everything there. Kernovich basically said that Nick was at war with, that Charlie Kirk was at war with his donors. So we get different confirmations. And then Max Blumenthal from the Grain Zone says that my sources drop lots of different articles with Trump, basically being, and lots of different insider sources. And then an insider confirms that Kirk's war with Israel was confirmed. And an insider confirms that Trump was fearful of Israel. So we get this different narrative that Trump is fearful, being blackmailed. Now, nothing to do with the Proof of Weapons network. Insider then confirms that Mossad has been spying on Trump. And then Trump basically, via Max Blumenthal's and the insider, didn't buy the official FBI story, that the FBI story is fake. And it's so fake. There was no timestamps. It literally confirmed everything one would need. It had language that sounded like, rather than saying car, vehicle, and various other things. Candace Owen did a breakdown of that. Trump insiders say that outside forces killed Kirk. We get those confirmation from, we don't know who the sources are. But basically, we're told and we're led to believe, as per the FBI story, that is a radical left, liberal kid. And Trump comes out and confirms that as well and blames everything on the radical left. So that was the tweet that I put out of all these different things. And so my analysis, again, it's an analysis, a theory around a conspiracy that I believe we will never get the correct confirmation. But based upon what I believe is happening right now, my theory is that this was an operation. And if it wasn't an operation, it was weaponized as an operation, even if this was just as a result of making people mentally ill because the lack of truth, as everybody finds out that everything they have been told is a complete lie. And so we're seeing that across the whole collective West. But I believe that this was a geopolitical tool that was used by the Proof of Weapons network, if not, to mark a turning point, pardon the pun. And crazily, you can create a conspiracy theory around me. Because a week before the operation, my blog on simondixon.com talked about how the Shanghai Proof of Weapons network marked a turning point in America. And that blog is still there. And Turning Point is the company. So people start to connect all of these different things. But remember what I've always shared. I've been talking about the longer term trend that is happening here. That because Middle East is changing drastically, the Proof of Weapons network does not have the same utility for Israel that it once did. And Israel is essentially a liability over an asset. And October the 7th, if you watch Atrocity Inc., was filled with absolute criticism, complete conflicting information over what you were told. Atrocity propaganda was used to make you feel a certain way, to justify what was done next. You can go to simondixon.com and watch a documentary, Atrocity Inc., that lays out all the lies and exactly who said the lies and how they don't match up with the evidence. And so October the 7th was a way of resetting the regional order. And this was because China and had worked on a normalization relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia that historically was utilized via fueling Israel in order to ensure that the Middle East could never unify around their resources. And now, because there are competing world orders, everything is changing. And so therefore, I've always said that peace in the Middle East is possible when three conditions are met. And I've covered this repeatedly over the years. Condition one is that Saudi Arabia and Iran normalize and stop being useful idiots for the military-industrial complex, which is requiring a proxy war with Israel to continue that. The second condition is there is an actual real resolution to the Palestinian cause that does not involve ethnic cleansing or genocide, And therefore, there needs to be a solution based upon the power dynamics and vassalization dynamics of regional powers rather than external forces, which is what Israel proxy military industrial complex for US is. And the third condition is that the US exits from the region as sponsoring the military industrial complex forever war model, and instead negotiates with the regional powers. And that normally looks like replacing military profits and forever wars with deals and financial industrial complex types of deals instead. And I've always believed that that's what happened on October the 7th, that there were regional players that knew what was going to happen. Netanyahu was set a game by the military industrial complex to level the playing field. And if he could expel the Palestinians by using America's IMF leverage to get Egypt to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians, then he had a set time to achieve that mission and determine his utility to the military profits. Because Egypt started pushing back by aligning with the GCC, backed by BRICS, China, and Russia, that operation didn't work, and Egypt held the fort and didn't allow for the ethnic cleansing to happen. And therefore, Netanyahu did not fulfill his mission, and his utility got worse and worse and worse. And therefore, there was this internal struggle between military profits for the dollar and financial profits by allowing a competing regional force to rise based upon a reset of order. And I think that that is what we have been witnessing. And so Israel was to do its usual land expansion for negotiation and leverage over the GCC, but eventually the military will stop funding it, stop making profits, and it will be vassalized into the region based upon control by the GCC and regional powers as opposed to US. And so I believe that all these three are happening as we speak. And that is because China normalized between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And we're starting to see lots and lots of demonstrations of that, which leads me into Operation 2 that I'll be covering as well. So I believe what we are witnessing is that Israel is being turned into a toxic asset. And therefore, it will be purchased, acquired, invested by the GCC and the regional players as external players boycott, divest, and sanction. But the regional players invest in order to take control. And that's the only plausible way of managing this, what I call divorce and blame shift. And then slowly, America tells the truth about what Israel is, which turns it into a pariah state. And then slowly the radicals start to exit because it is transitioned into this type of thing. So in my opinion, and again, my opinion, I can't prove this, but I can follow the money and speculate on this theory. And it doesn't really matter because directionally it's going here anyway, whether this was an operation or not. But in my opinion, the US dollar's proof of weapons network is running a controlled divorce from Israel, and it is being manufactured for its US audience, and it is using narratives to influencers in order to say things that could never have been said before and would have been shut down immediately, as was previously at different points. And so there is a reason why we're able to see this message now that we weren't able to see before. And I believe there is an internal struggle, because I've always talked about the proof of weapons network has an internal struggle. It has the financial industrial complex that I think Trump represents, and the military industrial complex that I believe Netanyahu represents. Military want to squeeze all profits, and finance have to demonstrate that it will get 10 times more profits through peace than through the forever war model. And this requires Israel changing what it is and actually becoming a state rather than a useful tool for a money laundering operation to siphon back profits to America. And that's why we're getting this change in narrative and this truthfulness that we've never had before. But not the full truth, just enough to manage a divorce, and you maintain that you think your country wouldn't do this, but it would only do this because it was blackmailed, APAC controlled, and various other things. Because they don't want you to point fingers at what actually controls, which is what I've been trying to describe, the proof of weapons network. And if you watch my, if you looked at my blog, "Do Jews Rule the World?" I explained that no, it is a power dynamic, and Jewish power is one faction of power, but it's not rule the world and force people to do stuff. It is a faction of power, and that power dynamically changes based upon who controls shares. And so you can go through all the different conspiracies, and I break down by following the money how that is a narrative that is utilized because there's elements of truth, but it's not the complete truth. So I believe the proof of weapons network is currently managing rage and manufacturing rage. And there is a narrative to Americans. There is a narrative to the rest of the world. And Americans are meant to hate Israel. And Israel is creating crimes against humanity. And there is a lot to hate about what is happening with that society. We've witnessed 2 years of genocide, and it's now being called by the United Nations a genocide. So since Kirk got assassinated, which was the day before 9/11, basically check what has dropped. Everything that takes away America from the pretense of having freedom of speech, First Amendment, Second Amendment. And I covered this in previous episode about manufacturing consent and you believing that the Constitution protects you. No, the Constitution protects you from the tyranny of government, but it does not protect you from corporations taking over the government and the proof of weapons network. And if you use your freedom of speech, they'll weaponize it for AI and social credit scores. And if you use your Second Amendment right, they will utilize that in order to manufacture a surveillance police state that they are currently doing right now. And so in order to make you angry, we've had the release of the Epstein files. I believe the proof of weapons network controls those and the politicians don't. And so that has been blocked. And that makes people very angry, given that the CIA has always been involved in sex trafficking, human trafficking operations and crimes against humanity. And it is a real problem. So we've also heard the Pentagon has now banned boycotting of Israel, even to the point where states that boycott Israel are not able to get access to disaster support. This makes people mad. This makes people very angry. This questions freedom of speech, and it plays into the narrative that Israel controls the world when those budgets control what those politicians do. Marco Rubio also is pushing to revoke any passports of Israeli critics. That makes Americans mad. And there is a genuine competing ideology. People are on a need to know about these operations, as I speculate is happening. We also had the approval of $650 million for Israel's missile defense. So more money going across during the time of showing the information about what is happening here. Rubio himself went off to Israel while this was all happening. That pushes out photo ops. Makes people really, really angry. You look under all of those expos and you see the anger. People saying, oh, you know, our governments are controlled. So it's the perfect blame shift narrative when the time is right, when the divorce needs to happen. And this is all happening while they prep the next stage. So they're basically turning the US into this surveillance state, technocracy. That was all in the big, beautiful bill. All of the Palantir integrations, all of the Department of Government Efficiency, all of the data that we've seen. We've already seen that the UK is the beta test. We're implementing all the technology. We've seen that technology was beta tested in Gaza via Palantir, in the West Bank, in integration with drones in Ukraine and various other things. And They're pushing Congress, Senate, and the courts keep pushing basically Israel first case law. That ties in perfectly to Israel controls the world narrative. Now, if the ethnic cleansing actually happens, I will change my belief around where this is happening. But I don't believe the end ethnic cleansing is actually going to happen. And that's because I believe the thesis that I got here, is that this is a regional managed turning Israel into a toxic asset while the US releases, while Iran and Saudi normalize, and Iran are complying with that, as well as the GCC and the things that I'll be covering in Operation 2 as well. So basically, what is this? These different Israel first types of things that you can push through while there is an Israel first Senate and Congress and maybe members of the judicial that are bribed. If you can create the case law, you can then change what you utilize this case law for later. And this is a slow removal of the Constitution and what Americans hold dear, and freedom of speech and various other things. Once these are used where you can get them through based upon a corrupt Israel first ideology that was built up over decades, you can then get lots of different law changes and case law that remove the Constitution, which is ready for this fueling the civil unrest and military type of martial law and various other deployments of federal police and ICE and the privatized prison industry and all the business models I've covered with Core Civic, GEO Group, Palantir, the other companies that are within the proof of weapons network that get paid like a dividend and revenue for the more civil unrest. So you can call me crazy, but what I'd encourage you to do is maybe check back in a year and we'll see directionally where this goes. And I'll keep covering this. So subscribe on my YouTube channel, hit the bell symbol, all, and I'll tell you if I think I'm wrong or I've got this wrong. But I don't think I have. And so the most important point is I may get some of the details wrong. I didn't think that we were going to get the 12-day war between Iran and Israel. But once it happened, I was able to say that this is all agreed upon theater, and that there is agreements, and I'll go through that in the second operation. And I believe the same was the case with the Israel striking of Qatar. And I covered it in real time as it happened, said what I think will happen next, and then I'll analyze what happened next, and we can see how wrong or right I was. But the point is, directionally, it seems to me that we're going in that direction. So it doesn't really matter whether they did it or not, it's how they use it. And I think they're using it for this right now. And I think people need to be cognitive. And of course, many people are falling for it's the radical left, it's the far right, it's the Muslims, it's the Jews, all that different stuff, and all the operations that I've told you about. That you can just pick your narrative and they'll give you a cocktail. We will never know, is my prediction, the full truth. And already everything the FBI has released, you can't even trust that. So this will send you on a merry-go-round of distraction forever, and it will be utilized to gain more traffic, to solidify and iconize different votes. And the tragedy is that Charlie Kirk dead was more useful to the proof of weapons network than Charlie Kirk alive. And that's the point. So the second part I wanted to cover, and then everything that happened this week that makes me believe that this is an operation, is Operation 2. And I covered it last week, and I covered it on Spaces in real time. Follow me on X if you want to get real-time analysis. And that is that Qatar, the Qatar and the Israel strikes that happened on Qatar, which also matched the Iran strikes on Qatar. And so we had both sides, Iran and Israel, are able to strike Qatar that achieve different means. And it didn't lead to a retaliation either way. That's because I believe Qatar agreed to it. They'll never admit it, but I think it served a strategic purpose. What did it achieve? So, okay, we get Qatar striked by Israel. Immediately you get the people that don't know how to analyze, say World War III, World War III. I gave you the reasons why Qatar is different from everyone else in the region, because America had a security deal with Qatar, and it hosts a US base, and it is a US ally that, for America, hosted the political arm of Hamas and was able to fund Hamas, and that got money in, have these destabilization campaigns and various other things. I don't know who's at the top there, but the US, and that is an Israeli narrative, we never get the full truth. We can just directionally look at who benefited from this. But at the end of this, the US security deal looks unreliable in the region. So all the regional players say, can we rely upon the US? No. Can we buy their weapons? Yes. Do we need protection from Israel? Yes. Who else can we buy weapons from? Russia, China. So who benefits at the end of this? Israel looks weak. US doesn't look like someone you can rely upon, but you get a bunch more cells for the US proof of weapons network in a defense manner rather than a forever war manner, which means that the proof of weapons network is negotiating as much cells as they can before the financial industrial complex takes over. China's already done the negotiation and the normalization, but Trump eventually will get his Abraham Accords, and he'll eventually get his Gaza plan, which I covered, but it will be a different version. But who's on top of the chain? It's the GCC and it's the proof of weapons network. They are replacing military profits with financial diplomacy and negotiations. So in response, what did we get immediately after after Israel was struck by Qatar? Well, we had Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, two members of the GCC, officially banned all Israel passport holders from entering into their countries. So there is a form of sanction over Israel. There was warnings of immediate arrests if they get found. So you can arrest any Israeli in the country, weakening Israel. Qatar planned basically that they were going to start purchasing some of the Russian S-400s, defend its sovereignty, and basically these allow you to shoot down Israeli jets and missiles. I'm not a military expert, but basically they hedge with Russia in order to protect Qatar. So that gives a flex to the US proof of weapons network that they're willing to look at alternatives because the order has been reset. Then Egypt comes out and plans to establish, basically there were headlines around a NATO-style joint Arab force in order to defend any of the Arab nations under attack. And so that gets a lot of headlines. That gives negotiation power in negotiating with the US proof of weapons network. So what is actually happening here? My speculation is that just as Qatar knew about the Iran strikes and that they were pre-agreed, and the end result was to give Israel the narrative it needs that is taking on Iran, America the narrative that it took out the nuclear threat, and Iran the narrative that it defended itself from Israel, while the IRGC hardliners that wouldn't agree to such a normalization were taken out. And obviously the Axis has not been supported since. So we're moving towards stabilization on all fronts in a unifying way that we've never seen before, with everyone being able to maintain their narrative and their optics in the geopolitical sense. Because it's the only way to make this transition without creating civil uprising because of the sheer crimes against humanity that Israel is committing via Netanyahu, via the profits of the military industrial complex, for the profits of the financial industrial complex, that is weaponizing genocide, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity as it always had. But we're now seeing it on video. So when the Iran strike happened, when Israel striked Iran, this was basically when the prevailing narrative was that the GCC appeared to be friends with Israel. And it was the prevailing narrative was they're all sellouts, they're all Zionists, they all support Israel. And they're basically enemies with Iran, and Saudi and Iran are the enemies, which they historically have been prior to the normalization. And it doesn't mean they like each other. It means that there is an opportunity for the region to expel the colonizers. And what was the point of resistance in the first place? It was to expel the colonizers and resist. So eventually you get to a point where goal is achieved. And why is goal achieved? Because there was a rising power, China, that aligned with BRICS, and BRICS aligned with the GCC. And now you're able to get this change. And October the 7th happened in order to reset the board and determine the next order at the same time as tariffs, at the same time as Trump, resetting America into a regional power. So I believe Qatar knew about the Israel strikes, and it was all prearranged. And basically, it was allowed to, the truth is allowed to come out and manifest itself about Israel at the same time when everyone helps Israel. And this helps push Israel into being a pariah state. And this is at a time when they need to flip the narrative, flip the chessboard. What do you need to flip the chessboard to? That GCC is an enemy of Israel. And that the GCC has normalized with Iran. So now you need to flip it exactly on the opposite side of what happened during the Iran strikes on Qatar. So I believe that this was all organized by China, as I said. So the question comes is, why would Netanyahu, allow for this to happen? Why would they order the strike knowing that it may lead to a reset and diplomatic ties happening all around the region and with the US proof of weapons network, but without Israel? Because my answer is, and this is what I argue with people on Spaces all the time, Netanyahu does not rule the world. He is controlled by the military-industrial complex and the proof of weapons network. And so because he is working with the proof of weapons network and does not work for Israel, his job is also to destroy Israel and get away with it, where he doesn't end up in prison and his cases go away. And so all of these different types of operations, I would say, is the proof of weapons network resetting the world order. Now, people will say that's crazy, that's 4D chess, but let's follow the money. Let's look at why this is happening. And I believe this is a managed transition. And this is why I continue to believe, unless I'll change my mind, if the Palestinians get ethnically cleansed, and it's allowed to happen because Egypt bow down to the IMF and they do what they're meant to do, rather than pushing back because of its new backing. So I personally believe that Israel is being vassalized into the GCC, and GCC is negotiating with the US proof of weapon network, and they are also hedging with a path of the European Union in case Trump goes rogue and no longer represents the plan of the financial industrial complex, and somehow this goes into a power struggle between the tops of the people that were sat around in the White House at the technical industrial complex and also were invited to Buckingham Palace in the UK, as I covered in part 2. So what did we get after that kind of backs up whether this narrative is the case? So the Ministry of Defense, His Royal Highness Prince Khalid bin Salman bin Abdulaziz, sorry if I get that completely wrong. But anyway, the Minister of Defense, he met with he met in Riyadh with Ali Lanijani, which is the Secretary General at the Iranian Supreme National Secretary Council. So they had a photo op immediately between Saudi Arabia and Iran. pushing normalization, that this is bringing us closer together. Anything that brings Saudi Arabia and Iran closer together is the opposite of what Israel wants if Israel ruled the world and Israel was in charge. And so during the meeting, and these things only happen when you want optics for it to achieve. So during the meeting, they basically reviewed all of the Saudi-Iranian relations that started from the normalization that China brokered between Iran and Saudi Arabia. They also discussed the regional developments and in an effort to achieve different types of security and stability in the region. Okay, so I think that says that they wanted optics that Iran and Saudi are good, and Qatar and the region are starting to negotiate deals with the US proof of weapons network, but the US security agreement is not good, and it is bypassing Israel, and therefore Israel is no longer a utility to US. What about the European side? Europe is vassalized by the proof of weapons network, as we covered. But the Spanish government now formally basically came out and said that nearly $700 million, a deal that was going to happen to acquire 12 Israeli-designed high-mobility rocket launchers, is cancelled. So in Europe, they're doing the sanctioning, divestment, and boycotting. Everybody else is doing the boycott because they hate Israel. That is making their economy a toxic asset. The stock market's still doing well because it's a part of the US proof of weapons network. So the military industrial complex is still rolling, but that's controlled by BlackRock and the financial industrial complex, while the economy gets wrecked and things are going more and more into civil unrest with the economy and Israeli society. Then at the same time, remember we covered the Egypt deal that they were going to get $35 billion, which would control a choke point of inflows of natural gas into Israel, and therefore it would become a dependent upon Egypt. So the neighbors are controlling the assets, which is the process of vassalization. That is the technique of the IMF and the economic hitmen, control through controlling routes and investment. Meanwhile, in Spain, they're doing the weakening of the economy. So Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, he announced that that basically they're going to coordinate a ban on weapon sales with Israel. So there's going to be no weapon sales. They're doing the sanctioning as well. He called for Israel to be barred from any type of international sports. So this is weakening the brand of Israel, turning it into a pariah state. Even the European Union basically suspended financial support to Israel. So it's only America left. America isolated the rest of the world against Israel, and Israel a pariah state. That's how you set up the perfect M&A type of transaction for a predatory deal by the financial industrial complex. So what did Netanyahu came out as well? Now, maybe this is what makes me think we're nearing the end of the absolute crimes against humanity. And please, could not be soon enough. I don't want to do this analysis anymore, but because there are still crimes against humanity, atrocities, death, destruction, starvation, famine. Like, the reality of the situation is horrific. And now it's being admitted, even though we knew all along and we were reporting all along. So Netanyahu came out and said to his people, Israel faces, this was in Hebrew, so whenever he speaks in English, it's designed for our consumption. When it's in Hebrew, it's designed for his audience. And so Israel faces growing global isolation and may be forced into an economically strangled super Sparta reality. He basically warned that due to sanctions, trade restrictions, and digital disinformation, campaign, so he needs his people to still be on board. Israel must prepare for a near autocratic economy, especially in defense industries. So the companies that are owned by the US proof of weapons network, i.e. the military industrial complex in Israel, the stocks do okay, but the economy does badly. Perfect setup. This will be basically this will be complete and total. So that was a quote from Netanyahu. So it makes me think, I hope, I pray that this is coming closer to the next phase. But I did believe that the Qatar strike was the next phase. So what do I think comes next? I think this will be complete vassalization of the entire Levant region by a regional hegemon. That means multiple players control their own region, a collective sovereignty, as it were, sovereignty. Complete and total vassalization, including Israel. And what Israel essentially is today will be completely transformed. I think it will be owned. I think it will be controlled one step at a time, over time, where the policy is no longer for the US military industrial complex, which means that they need to be a normal state, which will take all of the fake Zionist cult and make them want to leave, because it will eventually, I believe, be an Arab, dominated region again, as it was before. And Jewish people that don't want to engage in ethnic cleansing and settler colonialism will leave. And that's what I think is happening in the region. All of the people that were just there for the money and the investments, they'll all go because they won't like it anymore. And I think this is the transition phase we are going to. So we got announcements as well as a result of the strike. Quote, Qatar and the US are close to finalizing a stronger defense cooperation agreement. This is the actual truth. So this is what's actually happening. But they shouldn't have said US, because US is a vassal state for the proof of weapons network. This is about negotiating the weapons sales into a defense environment rather than a forever war, and making sure that that the military companies get to still service this as they exit the region and make more of their profits upon Europe, Latin America, and Central America and the neighbors. Maybe escalate with Greenland and various other things. Now, we got a massive hype cycle around Qatar looking for alternatives and not working with the US and all sorts of defense treaties. And I personally believe that was brought about by that was meant to happen. Well, the result of all of that, if you think about it, is you do a deal with the US, but Israel is no longer useful because Israel is a forever war tool. And so if Qatar goes direct to US and US looks bad, then I think you get the theatrics and the optics that are as a result of GCC negotiating with the Proof of Weapons Network, which are the real powers. Okay. We got announcements of finalization of advanced cooperation agreement. Now, we also got the United Nations. There's been a bunch of stuff at the United Nations. There was an inquiry that concluded, and the language came out for the first time, that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. That was the headline. So we get the admission for the first time, not the plausible genocide, which was determined in court. But now we get the United Nations, which will be used in the court case, that this is happening. And so we're getting this element of truthfulness that's coming out. We all know that the United Nations was a tool for US power, and US will be the last veto vote. The Europeans are switching because Saudi Arabia has built all those relationships. Qatar's been making all those investments. And the right wingers are basically deciding, whether they want to be aligned with the financial industrial complex, or they want to continue with the military forever war. You're getting this realization not everyone is in on the operation as I see it. It's on a need to know basis with the right people. But this is about narrative shift and a slow shift. And this is all just a calculation, and then they test whether these things work or not. And there's nothing else to it for them. We're getting more and more criticism of Zionists that are being, they're basically having to go through their reforms and where they sit on this and where they're going to go. There is more and more narratives that are allowed to hit the mainstream and social media that would never have been allowed before around hating Jews and all those different things. Also, equally, the hating Muslims narrative that's being push. We get the Tommy Robinson types of operations, and we're getting those extreme factions that can create the civil unrest when they need to create it. So anyway, what is happening next? So that's everything that happened in this week. So we're going to get everybody in the world, I believe, with the exception of a few, are going to be voting for the Palestinian state at the next United Nations meeting on September the 22nd. So in order to isolate US further and make Israel a pariah state, what did Trump do? Trump sanctioned the Palestinian leadership from attending the United Nations meeting. And today in the United Nations, they voted to allow attendance virtually because Trump pushed back on the visa, or the administration jumped back on the visa. This is to satisfy the Zionist hardliners within the US, but eventually the result is the same. But eventually, US becomes completely isolated. Israel becomes a toxic asset. And the US voted today in the UN Security Council resolution, or I think it was yesterday. There's been back-to-back ones that was demanding a ceasefire. It was literally, the language was, we demand a ceasefire and the immediate release of all hostages. In favor were 14 at the UN Security Council, against just one. The United States completely isolated in veto voting the release of hostages and a ceasefire. So then Trump reacted by inviting Netanyahu to the White House, which is going to make Americans mad or satisfy the hardliners. You satisfy those, and then it ties into the Israel rules the world. That's going to be on September the 29th. So we're going to be gaslit, and we'll have to cover some of that and analyze that. And this is his fourth visit to the White House. At the same time, Trump's only been in power for 8 months. That's how crazy and how fast things are moving. Wow, 8 months. And everybody will continue to believe that Trump is controlled via Jeffrey Epstein. The Proof of Weapons Network probably controls those files. And they're both controlled by the Proof of Weapons Network. Israel, Netanyahu, Trump, America, UK, Starmer, European Union, Macron, Canada, and all the different parts that we cover week after week after week. At the same time this week, you got different types of conversations around the Iran nuclear deal, and that is those conversations are continuing. And so you get the back and forth until the deal is done. Then we probably get the announcement at the end of it when the time is right. And this is what I call Operation Divorce and Blame Shift, and I think it will continue for a while. Eventually, we're getting the slow integration between the axes of resistance. Rather than resisting because we're moving to the next phase, it's no longer funded. And so you either integrate into the region or you get eliminated through cooperation by the whole region and the resetting of the power, which is what I think we've seen time and time again. Again, this is not what I'm advocating for. This is what I think is happening based upon just following the monetary flows and the general direction. After that, I believe we're going to witness the fall of the Israeli cabinet. Netanyahu probably disappears and won't be held accountable because he's been a good tool for the Proof of Weapons Network, and he's fulfilled all of his goals, and he favored the Proof of Weapons Network over Israel. I think you're going to see that. and they got all of the investments in the financial industrial complex that they needed as a result of this. And the GCC got their control, and then all the different negotiations were happening to align the interest of finance and GCC. And all of this, I believe, weakened Israel and strengthened the GCC and the proof of weapons network, but from the financial perspective rather than from military forevermore. So we got a couple of additional announcements. We got an announcement from Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. They basically signed a joint strategic defense agreement. What the agreement essentially says, whoever attacks Saudi Arabia attacks Pakistan, and whoever attacks Pakistan attacks Saudi Arabia. Now, Pakistan is a nuclear force as well. So this is the first deal that Saudi has signed with a nuclear power other than US. So this moves towards this strategic independence at the same time as purchasing still weapons from the US proof of weapons network. And then there were rumors that were put out there that Qatar and UAE may join the same defense agreement with Pakistan that Saudi Arabia signed. And Saudi Arabian central bank signed a deal as well to launch Alipay, which is a payment provider by 2026 working with China. So you got these different competing, slow, managed transition between the BRICS and the proof of weapons network with America as a regional power, which is exactly where I think they wanted to sit at the end of this, with their own regional sovereignty, but co-investment with the finance and colonizers to buy more of their freedom, rather than having Israel as this force for destruction, which is fueled by Iran and Israel being always at their throats. So that will allow for different payments within China. So that was I talked about the Shanghai Proof of Weapons Network that's being built as well. And remember, Pakistan historically was an IMF tool, but now it's got Belt and Road Initiative. So that connects into the yuan military transactions that are happening. And essentially it allows the region to have its deal with the military industrial complex and the financial industrial complex, hedge away from the West with the East. And basically following the money means that the Saudi-Pakistan defense pact, I don't think is really about building, some real type of deterrent. It will get tested. That then goes into BRICS and India and various other things. I think it's more like kind of portfolio adjusting and the proof of weapons network. There was a great post by Evan on X that went through like this different types of portfolio management, which I'll summarize a little bit as we close off as well. But basically they are spreading risk. They get to do different transactions, different types of flows. And these new negotiations basically lead to different types of portfolio management and switching the companies that they want to switch power to. And this is how the proof of weapons network. So you can flow different types of deals either in dollars, or you can do them through Western channels, or you can do them through, international financial institutions. This is kind of what I think they're negotiating in the background. But this is a big win for the financial industrial complex, which means that FIC is winning over MIC generally. Okay. And so that is everything that I think is happening this week. You've got one member of the GCC that allegedly harbors terrorists, which is the Hamas side. And then you've got another member of the GCC, which is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, that is normalizing with Pakistan as an alternative route that is also doing deals with the European Union. And so you really get a double blow for Israel, because under neither direct to the proof of weapons network without Israel military industrial complex, and you get the other type of model, which is the EU, which is a double blow to Israel. So I believe that this helps the proof of weapons network revenue streams remain intact. It diversifies across different buyers and different partners, rather than fully having to rely upon just the US proof of weapons network, which creates a hedge. And the end result is that you get the weakening of Israel. And then when you get this managed transition as well. And I think it was the Qatar strike, both times by Iran and by Israel on Qatar, that was needed in order to pressure everything into this diplomacy phase that comes next. And I said, we are moving in this direction, and I know I'm wrong if we end up with the Palestinians being ethnically cleansed. And that is what I think we are witnessing in terms of the geopolitical side at the moment. So it's both a black pill, red pill, orange pill, and also a little bit of a belief that there's glimmer of hopes that we should be nearing the end. And once you get to the end of this, imagine the difference in the world when US is regional. Imagine when BRICS has more control over what's happening in Africa and the impact in the global south, and the possibility for the Middle East to actually enter into this phase of just not killing each other because of these unnatural divide and conquer interventions. It may not be exactly what we want. It's not exactly what I would advocate for. But I hope this is the direction that is actually going. And I think that's what we need to remember. So you need to protect yourself in the West. I think the POW is going to look to make up the profits. And I think it's cannibalizing itself. I'll keep covering the different types of things. And we'll keep analyzing. And this is everything I've got for the part 3 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 98. Why would Israel want to kill or assassinate Charlie Kirk? And the answer is 2 operations. And if you tuned in right at the end, go back to the beginning. And I covered the 2 different types of operations. And with that in mind, I'd like to remind you that if you enjoyed this content and you would like to continue along the journey, then please do subscribe to me on YouTube. Please do follow me on X, where I stream on both of them. Please follow me on Rumble in case I ever get taken down by the YouTube Proof of Weapons Network and the Technical Industrial Complex. And I back everything up on simondixon.com. There's lots of guides there that you can gain. I created a 5-part blog series so that you can really dive deep into these different topics, learn how to self-custody and protect yourself. This is how we resist. You can also get a free login to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, where I give you lots of resources to help yourself protect yourself. Boycott the Fed with Bitcoin. Boycott BlackRock by owning it in self-custody. Boycott the banks by not borrowing against your Bitcoin once you own it in self-custody. Boycott the global institutions of the Proof of Weapons Network by spending local wherever you can and investing in decentralization, and resist against centralization with decentralization. But always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Some are going to get wrecked. Others are going to do really well. I hope we can transition by having our self-custody, which allows us to be in peace, love, and unity, and get to where we need to be in order to have the maximum impact. I'll come back next week with Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 99, and we'll break this down into different parts, and you can get it on the podcast or all the different resources. I would really appreciate it if you got me past 102,000 subscribers on YouTube. And you followed me on X so that I can get this message out to as many people as possible. And please do share it. I'll see you this time next week for Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 99. Peace.